recording. Great. Excellent. So where we kind of left off yesterday is we were looking at events. We learned a couple different ways to explore and play with these events. You guys all seem to have done a pretty good job on the regular expression exam, or tutorial that was one of the complicated things we covered yesterday. And I would encourage you to just every once in a while maybe do an exercise with the regular expression, just so you can keep it top of mind, because that is one of the most effective ways to process large amounts of text without a lot of hassle. All right, cool. So up until now, we've been focused mainly on events that do things when the user performs an action, right? So everything is like, I have clicked a link, I have clicked a button, I have moved my mouse, those sorts of things. But there are going to be a lot of scenarios in which you want things to happen on their own. And for that, we're going to introduce a new concept of timers, right? So right now you can see that I've clicked yes, but you know, let's pull up our code editor and we can see how this works in an interesting way, right? All right, so let's first give us a button. We'll say button ID equals future button, and we'll give it a value that says like do something in the future, right? Cool. So when we want to use a timer, there are a couple different methods we can use. The first one that we're going to take a look at, let's just give ourselves a document.getElementById future button, and we're going to give it, wait, what am I doing? Oh, yep. .add event listener, and we're going to say click. So when we click this button, we're going to do something, but we want it to happen in the future, right? Because right now, we know that we can come in here and we could say like alert hello, right? And as soon as I click this button, it's going to immediately perform that action. But let's say we wanted to delay that action 10 seconds, right? So the way we can do that is with a set timeout, right? So there is a function that exists, and it is called set timeout. And this function takes two arguments. The first argument is a function, right? So just like with add event listener, where we're passing in a function here, right? This argument is going to take a function as well. So we can use an anonymous function, and we'll say, in a few seconds, we want to alert hello. Okay. And then the second argument is the time. So this number is milliseconds, right? So it's, if you wanted to do 1 second, there would be 1,000. So let's just see this and see what happens, right? Click this button, we wait a second, a thing pops up, okay? We could use this in any kind of environment in which we want something to happen in the future. Or like a good example of this would maybe be like, maybe what we do is we have, we would set a timer on the page that says like, hey, in a minute, check and see if I've added anything to the information here. And if I haven't, to a form, we're going to log you out of the website. Like maybe a bank would do that. And they'll have a timeout that says, hey, in 10 minutes, check to see if the user has moved their mouse recently, and then log them out if they have not. Okay, I'm sure you guys have seen that kind of pattern before, right? But it's important to note that set timeout operates one time. Okay, so I'm going to click this button. It creates a brand new timeout. Everything is great. Okay. Now, what if we wanted to have something operate over and over and over again? Okay. There is a special function for that as well, and that function is set interval. Right. So let's make ourselves a new button. Maybe we'll say button ID equals better future button. Right. Do something repeatedly in the future. And let's give ourselves a little area to play with. So let's just say div ID equals interval. Right. And maybe we'll put a value in there to begin with. Let's say 0. Okay. So let's attach an event to this. Document.getElementById. What do we call it? Something better future button. Yeah. Better future button. And we will say add event listener, click. And the function that we're going to put in here, let me just do function. So when we click, it's going to run this function, and the function is going to do set interval. Oh, here's an even better one. Let's do this first. Yep, set interval. And this uses the exact same format, right? So it's going to take a function to do, and it's going to have a timer for how often it happens. So we can come in here and we can say function what do we call our we call the interval? So we'll say var int value equals document dot get element by ID interval, and we know that this is if we console.log int value here, we know it's going to be a string, right? Because HTML is a string. When we're getting the value of whatever's inside that div, it's going to show about as the number 0, but inside of quotes. So we need to does anyone remember what function we use to turn a string into a number or into an integer? Andrew, Estrella, Leah, any of you remember? If we wanted to convert a string into an integer, what would we do?
It would be var the number equal the string.
Nope. So that's kind of what we did here. We said int value equals this, right? So if we did console.log, well, let's just run this in here in our console so you can see this in real time. The tools. If I run this and I do console.log type of int value, right? It's going to tell us string because that is a string. How can I convert a string, right? Int value is a string of 0. How do I convert that into a number? So we can do math on it. I'll give you a hint. It starts with the word parse.
Parse int.
Yeah, parse int. Exactly. And we also have parse float if we needed to make it like, 30.4, right? So we'll do parse int and int value, and that gives us the actual number 0 that we can then math on, right? The reason we need to do this is I'm going to use an interval here, and what we're going to do as a simple experiment is every second we're going to tick this number up, right? So it'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forever. But if I did int value by itself, int value is a string, and if I go int value equals int value plus 1, right? Now we got 0, 1, 0, 1, 1. That's not the behavior we want, right? So we have to turn it into an integer with parse int. Okay. So great. So all we have to do here is just go parse int and wrap that whole thing in parse int. So now we've got our value here. We want to actually assign that to the element, so we'll do document.getElement by ID interval dot inner HTML equals int value plus 1. Okay, simple enough, right? We've got a function in here, and then we know that our the set interval function takes a second argument, which is the timer, right? So if we wanted to do this every second, we'd put in 1,000. So now, when we load the page, oh, because I have to click the button first, right? So now you can see it's going to tick up every second, right? This can be any number, so if we wanted to make this something crazy, right, we could do this every 10. So when I click this button, that number is going to go up real fast, right? And that's going to operate forever until we stop it somehow, right? Either the page is going to reload, or if we wanted to delete this, we have an extra function that we have. So let's just maybe we'll, now that we have this little thing that's counting up for us, let's maybe make this let's change it back to a second. Let's go in and add an extra button, and we'll maybe just say like start timer, right? And then we'll maybe make a button that says stop timer button. Okay. So now we have a button that will stop the timer and one that will start the timer. So how we can stop the timer is with set interval. There is an associated function called clear interval. Now, clear interval takes a single argument, and that single argument is the ID of the interval that was created. Okay, and the way we get this is that set interval returns this. So we could do, let's make ourselves a variable that we can get in here, and we'll say var timer ID equals, let's just create it. So set interval, if I go timer ID equals that, when I click on this button, right, if I do timer ID, you can see that it's got a number 16 in here. So every time we click set interval, or even set timeout works the same way, it's going to return a value that will let us clear it. So if you can see that number is counting up. If I do clear interval, and I put in the number 16, right, now it is well, I have multiple timers because I clicked the button twice. Okay, so if we check timer ID, yeah, so now that timer ID is 6. You can see that the number is ticking up every second, but I can go clear interval 6, and now it will stop. If I click the button again, timer ID is going to have another number, right? Now it's 35. And so I can come in here and I can say clear interval timer ID, and it's going to stop the timer, right? So that's what we need to do for our start and our stop buttons here. So let's go in here and play with this and see what it does. All right, so we got this. That's working great. Let's come in here and say, yep. What do we call this? Stop timer, right? Stop timer, and we'll say click function, and we will put in clear interval timer ID. Right? Everything looks good? Yeah. So I click the start button, it will start counting. I click stop, and it will stop counting, and then it restarts. Okay? So we've been playing with some of the things. How would you use this in the real world? A great example of what we would do with something like this would be like when we were playing with the zombie game, or we were playing in Leah's example. She's got the poker game, right? You might want to only let each player get 30 seconds to make their move. Set interval gives you the control or the ability to create any number of timers that are going to run forever on whatever kind of interval that you want them to run, right? And just check to see if a move has been made. Or really, in a lot of these examples, you're using a timer, to change a value on the page every couple of seconds or whatever kind of duration you want, right? And you can have any number of timers in here. So we could have, for example, this is a single timer ID, right? We could have made this var timers equals array, okay? And so now what we might want to do is we might want to say var timer ID equals that, and then we can come in here and say timers.push timer ID. So now if we look at our page, we click the start timer button. If we look at timers, we got one that's in there. Every single time I click this button, it's going to make a new interval, and you can see that the time has started increasing because we've got all these things that are all operating this single function that says, hey, every second take whatever that value is and increase it, right? So this has given us kind of the ability to make like a speed up, slow down type of mechanism as well. Though there are better ways to do that, certainly. We've just gotten that for free. And then we probably need to make it so that we, instead of this timer just saying clear interval timer ID, which is a string, we need to like loop through each of those timer IDs. And so we might want to do like for var I, actually here's a better one, right? So while var timer ID equals timers.pop, right? So as long as there is a value in that array, pop it off and give it to us, we can clear the intervals, right? Unexpected. Oh, so we have to make it out here. So we'll do var timer ID. It doesn't like us declaring variables in these while blocks, right? So start timer. I'm going to create a bunch of these, right? So now I got all these things, but I want to stop them all at once. I click stop, and if we look at our timers array now, it's an empty array again, right? Any questions? This is one of my favorite things in JavaScript because it opens up an entire world of letting us build interesting and unique applications, whether that's a game or some kind of auto login, logout mechanism. We can say, hey, in the future, do this thing, right? And we can make it really interesting and fun. You could build a prank website. Maybe it's April Fool's, and you want to build like a website that looks cool, but every time you click a button, maybe the button disappears and then reappears a few seconds later, right? We can do something fun like that as a silly example, right? So we can say like button ID equals prank button. Click here for $1,000. Right? And this is a really silly example, but it'll be fun. So what do we call it? Prank button. Prank button. Click. Function. And we'll say this dot style dot display equals none. Right? So as soon as I click this button, the button will disappear. Okay, which like, what happened? Where did my $1,000 go? Right? And then we can come in here and just say set timeout function document dot get element my ID prank button dot style dot display equals inline. And then we'll say, hey, in 2 seconds that button will come back. So this should work. I click it, it disappears. Now it comes back. Wait, give me my $1,000, right? We can do all kinds of silly stuff with this. But for the first time, this really exposes the entire breadth of the things that you can do in JavaScript, combining interactivity that we get through events, data storage that we get through variables like arrays and strings and numbers, and some kind of miscellaneous future activity that we get with set timeout or set interval. Okay. Any questions? Does this all make a ton of sense to you? Okay. Great. We can play more with this. We are going to have homework that is going to be about using these things to make a countdown timer, right? We have, this little simple example that we made here is kind of like a count up timer, but the homework for over the weekend is going to be to like have some date in the future, and this will be a web page that just displays a countdown until that date is reached. Okay, so that's kind of the same logic. You're still going to want to check at specific intervals, but then how do you get that to display correctly? And that's really one of the interesting examples of software engineering, right? Because even in this example we have here, where we're counting up by second, what do you think the behavior should be when we get to like 59 seconds? Like
it goes to 1 minute.
Yeah, it should be like 1 and then back down to 0, 0. So, we're using this interval here as like a count, as like a timer, maybe like a stopwatch would be a better way to look at this. But you would still be responsible for doing all of the interesting math that says when it gets to 59 seconds, the next one, make it go back to 0, 0, 0, and maybe you need to create an element that tracks minutes. And then minutes is, every time that ticks over, a minute, the minutes are added. And now when you get to 59 minutes, now you need hours. And if you get to 24 hours, now you need days. And if you get, 30 plus days, now you maybe have months. So there's a lot of interesting complexity that knowing that this function exists for us now opens us up to like, okay, well, I've got to do more coding now in an interesting way to solve problems. Some of the things that we might do is, we've got this doing thousands of seconds, right? So that like, if we do this, right, now we've got a timer that is going to be like extremely fast. So we can have extreme precision with our timing events just with this kind of mechanism, right? And we could make an entire game which is like, stop the timer when it gets to 10,000, and so you're like in here trying to like hold your button, and we can gauge reaction times. Like there are some video games like Counter-Strike, Quake, where reaction time is extremely important. So we can make an entire video game just with like 10, 15 lines of code in which all we're doing is saying like, whenever we're going to randomly select the time, have some event pop on the screen, and as soon as you see it, you're going to click a button. And if you click that button, how quickly did you click that button? Right? We could build an entire. Maybe we'll do that tonight, just as a fun exercise, right? We can add some. Maybe you have to click on the element on the page, and we randomly position it as well, right? Cool. Any questions with this? Okay. What arguments does the set timeout function take? And in what order do we put them? Andrew.
So the first argument is going to be a function that says what it's going to do, and then it's going to be the time after that.
And is the time in hours, weeks?
It's in milliseconds.
Yep. So it's like 1 second is 1,000, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, exactly right. Set interval, Estrella. What are the arguments of set interval?
First is going to be the function, and then the time for when you want it to go.
Yep, perfect. Leah. what does set interval return when you call it? So if we wanted to like store whatever set interval returns, what is it going to return for us?
I didn't know it returned anything.
Yeah, so set interval, set timeout does as well, but it returns an ID. So it doesn't matter what you call the variable. This could be called like, Leah's ID. Right? This is our variable. It belongs to us. But it's going to return a number, and it's usually going to, it's always going to be an integer. So it'll be like 1 to 1,000,000. And that ID, why do we need to use that? What do we use this for?
It's what gets changed.
Nope. It is the reason that this returns an ID to us is so that we can stop it with clear interval. So we have to have this value, right? If we want to build an interval, like so, let's just make one that happens when the page loads, right? So we can come in here and we, as soon as the page loads, we can start this function, right? What do we have here? Yep. So we could just say, start counting immediately as soon as the page loads, right? So now this is there, but I have no way to stop this. If I click stop timer, right? Because we were expecting that timer ID to be in the clear interval thing, I have no way to stop this. So if we want to be able to stop it, we need to be able to, that ID that comes back, right? Set interval, right? Yeah, got let's see. Function. Give it an empty function, and let's just say call it. Right? See, this is interval 5601, so I could at any time delete interval 5601. Now, because these are numbers, we could probably do something clever. Like if we created an interval and we wanted to clear it out, right? We could probably just do like for var I equals 0, I is less than 1,000. Well, we know we have 5601 at least, right? I plus plus. And we could do clear interval I, right? So it's going to try every clear interval, every number between 0 and 5601, right? So this should clear, yeah. I don't know which one it cleared. That was actually the interval that we had when the page load, right? But you could brute force it this way, right? But this way is obviously inefficient, especially if you got a page. Like we can be in here. The longer you're on this page, the higher this number is going to eventually get, right? These there's a whole bunch of intervals happening behind the scenes all the time, right? So if we go to timers, right? You see, these aren't like absolutely sequential. It doesn't go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It goes, 512, 548, all the way up to 19 something. And if let's click it again, right? Start timer. So the last one we had before was 1932. Now we're up to 7563. So this number could get massive. If you're sitting on this page, for a while, let's clear all these out, right? So now timers is empty again. Let's see what this is at now. Yeah, now we're at 10,000 something. I don't know why. I don't know what the browser is deciding behind the scenes of like why to use that number. Maybe that'd be interesting to dive into. But generally what you just want to do is whenever you call set interval, you just want to throw it in an ID and maybe shove it in an array or something somewhere so that you can reference it and call it back, right? If you were building a, like in a poker game, for example, like every time it's a new player's turn, you're going to create a new interval that counts down. So you'd be like, you have 30 seconds to, bet, fold, raise, whatever you're doing. And so each one of those would be a new interval. But as soon as I make a turn or do something, it's not my turn anymore. You're going to want to go in there and clear that interval by that ID. So you'd probably want to have some kind of array. Maybe you'd even have an array like var players player timers equals, right? And then in here you'd maybe have it by name. So it'd be like Eric's timer is null, right? Leah's is null. And then as each player around, if Andrew had one, right? Null. So then, you might want to shove Eric's timer in here, and as soon as Eric's done, and we know it's Leah's turn next, right? Then you would want to set this back to null as soon as you've cleared it. Does that make sense? Everybody kind of tracking along here? Set interval and set timeout. Those are the two cool ones. There's also a clear timeout, right? Clear timeout. It works exactly the same way. So set timeout does return a timeout ID. It will return one of these, but I guess the thing would be like set timeout only fires once, right? So if we say I'm going to make a timer and it's going to fire in 2 seconds, I don't often see a lot of value. I'm not going to clear that timeout if I've just set it like a one-time use thing. But maybe in a scenario where like maybe you have an interval running all the time, checking for activity on the page, right? So maybe we have a bank website, and it's just making sure that these values are changing, right? I'm here on the page, I'm doing something. As soon as these numbers stop changing, I set a timeout for 10 minutes in the future, and then if I come back here and these move again, right? This function that is watching the movement will clear that timeout and be like, I'm not going to log you off. So that would be maybe one use of that. But it's going to function exactly the same way. You're going to use the ID, and you're going to do clear timeout. So we do timeout ID. Okay. So in this example, we have this prank button that was set to 2,000 seconds. If I close this now, because I'm also clearing that timeout, our button will never return, because that timeout will never fire. Does that make sense? Cool. Any questions about this? These are like two extremely powerful functions that are just baked in by default, and especially if you're designing anything very interactive, you'll probably use these pretty frequently. And we will 100% use these maybe on the server side as well, right? If we want to have like every 30 minutes check a log or something like that, right? Because we're going to use JavaScript on the back end as well. These same functions will be available to us. Okay, everybody is a timeout wizard now. We'll build something with this in a little bit, maybe something fun. Yeah, let's actually build something with it now rather than move on to the next topic. Yes, Gregory?
Can you make laps?
Can I do what?
Make laps. Like, when you have timer and you create laps so then it could record those laps times.
Yeah, so so like if I had a stopwatch and it was like every time I pressed it, it would kind of like start a new timer but record that value. Yeah, absolutely. So can anyone think of how I would maybe want to structure that from a data perspective? So we have this timer right now, and let's stop the one that's automatic. Let's delete you. So now we're back to our old behavior where we've got a start timer and a stop timer. But maybe what we want to do is as soon as I click start timer for the first time, we change it to like start lap 2. Okay? So let's make that happen first. So all right, so we have a timers array. Let's just come in here and say, before we do anything, we want to change the value of the button. So we'll say if timers.length is less than 1, right? So if there's nothing in our array, we are going to do this.inner HTML equals start next lap, right? So we can verify this works really quickly. Start timer, it immediately goes to start next lap. Everyone following along so far? Okay, so now if I click start next lap, I want to take the value here to whatever it is, save it somewhere, and then start counting over from 0 again maybe, instead of doing what we're doing previously. Or maybe we want to have it always continue to count up, but we just want to display like lap 1 was at, right. So what would I do here? All right, we've got, I click the button, start next lap. So maybe what I do then is I say, all right. So we got our value here. So maybe what we do is if I click start next lap, right? So if it's not the first lap, then I take the value. So I do var int val u equals, right, the same thing. Okay. And then let's make ourselves a unordered list. So let's give ourselves a new div, and we'll do right. It'll be ID lap times. Well, let's make it in a UL first. So we'll just do an empty div, and inside this empty div, we're going to put an empty UL, and the UL will have an ID of lap times. Okay. So whenever we get this start next lap button, so if timers.length is less than 1, we don't have any other timers available to us, we're going to start the next lap. We change the button to that. Otherwise, we're going to say, hey, we're already running. Let us get the value and then put it in this element, right? So we'll do document.get element by ID. What do I call it? Lap times? Yeah. Lap times. Right? So that's our UL. Right, so that's my unordered list. But I probably want to do a var lap time li equals document.create element li. And maybe I want to say lap time li dot inner HTML equals lap, and then we'll say int value. Right, so we'll say every time we click this button, it's going to say it's going to be a lap. Oh, maybe this, right? Oh, we'll cover that in a second, right? And then I'm going to go ul dot append child lap time li. Great. Is everyone following along? We have, if we're already running, we're going to get the value and store it somewhere else. Append child of null. Why is append child null? Oh, I typoed that. Yeah. So this is case sensitive. So now we're good. Right? Now, if I was building this for real, and I was actually trying to build a timer, I would be like, okay, every time I click this start next lap button, this lap time information is pushing down my controls, making it so that it's hard to like actually be accurate. So I'd probably then, now that I have this functionality, I would go back to CSS and I would say, how can I position this information here so that it does not break my page? And you know, maybe what I would do right off the bat is I would just come in here and say, lap times. I mean, maybe just float right, and then maybe down here we got some div which is our buttons, some div, and we would do clear both, right? So now if I click this, right, now my laps are way over here. That's probably, you know, that's not what I want necessarily, and it's still pushing everything down. Oh, because we use clear both. Let's take this out. Right, so start timer. Right. And so now I've got all my laps over here. Now, that's not positioned where I'd want it to be, but it's at least not breaking my page. Okay? The other thing that jumps out at me here is that I would maybe want these, right? Maybe want these to be, like, the easiest thing we could do here is just change this from an unordered list to an ordered list, right? So now I get to know what lap it was. Lap 1, lap 2, lap 3. That's pretty cool. We just built like a lap timer, and it took like 8 seconds, and we didn't have to put much work into it, right? Oh man, this person is starting to slow down. But then the other thing that's interesting is like, because we're counting this as like milliseconds, we would probably like, what's more interesting maybe is the seconds total, right? So we might actually want to come in here and, you know, it's interesting that we're counting in milliseconds because we're in a race and milliseconds matter. But for the display over here, I might want to come in here and say, you know, divided by 1,000, so that we'll get like a nice decimal, right? So start timer. Let's give it a second, and we'll go, yeah. Right? That looks pretty good, right? I'd be happy with that. Now, I'd probably want to put this somewhere else. I'd maybe want to make it over here, and maybe make it, you know, scroll or something. But we've built timer, like a lap timer. Now there's one thing to note. Does anyone know what the problem is with our little timer here with this start next lap thing? What is our logical problem here? Maybe it's hard to see in this one. Let's make it slower.
It's is it getting faster like every time?
It sure is. How do we do this? Yeah. Yeah, right here. Alright, so let's make this, I don't know, maybe we want to make this 100. Alright, so it doesn't go quite as fast. Okay? The more I click this, the faster this is going to go. So our timer is getting more and more incorrect as we go along, right? So, how I would fix this though, right, because we got most of stuff here, we only really need one timer. We're just storing the value into an HTML element. So probably what I want to do is, instead of timers.push every time, right, we maybe want to clear our timers in here as well, right, because we're still starting a brand new interval right here. So I maybe want to come through here and go, you know, timers.map. Right, we learned about map yesterday, right? So it's going to execute this on each one. And maybe I'll just do a clear interval, right? So that's going to clear out everything that's in that array, and we'll only ever have one timer, I think. Let's look at timers. Is it working? It's not. Yeah, so it's rapidly speeding up. Okay, so the map didn't work. Let's maybe just brute force this. And we'll say for var I equals 0, I is less than timers.length, I plus plus. And we'll say something like, there's a better way that I just thought of, but we'll do this one first and see if this is, so we'll say clear interval timers I. Right, so this should keep us doing correct math. Timers. Still not. Oh, because we need to do. Oh, we could do it the same way, right? We had. Let's use this one. This is cleaner. Right. So instead of even counting, we just say, you know, pop it off. If we look at timers now, yeah, just got the most recent. So there is a better way to do this.
Could you do timers for each with that instead of using the for loop?
Instead of using while loop here? Is that what you're saying?
The one below when we did the for.
Where do you see that?
Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe
I
it
was
the
writing
while
it
loop.
for originally, and then I changed
Oh,
it to
okay.
this while because I think this is a cleaner syntax because it's going to remove
Okay.
it from the array at the same time. But there's a better way than doing this that doesn't involve looping at all. Can anyone think of what it is? Right? So we click it once, it created a timer, we're happy. We click it again, we don't want it to create another timer. What can we do? This is the code that's creating our timer. We just want this not to work, right? If we already have a timer going. We're already checking if we have a timer going. Oh, with this if else. So to me, the easiest solution is just move this up a new, right? So if there's no timer, start a timer. Now we can look at timers, right? It's got timer 11, start next lap. We're logging them. Timers just still says 11. We're not clearing any timers. We don't have to loop through anything. We just created one. So we could probably even simplify this even more. So we originally made this an array because we thought we were going to have a whole bunch of timers in here. We could turn this back into a string or something, or into an integer, excuse me. And so maybe what we want to do is instead of timers.push, we just want to say, timers. So we'll say timers. And timers is probably a bad name because it's not going to be multiple, right? So we'll just say timer. and we will say timer. And then instead of timers.length is less than 1, we can just say if timer, right? Because we defined it as null. Null is going to be false. And now if timer, if there's a value in there, we're good. If not timer, right? So if this is false, or we could do it the other way and say if timer equals null, right? So now we're good, and if we look at timer, it's just a number. We don't have an array floating around anymore. And we've just evolved into that by just, hey, we built a timer, and then Gregory, the customer, said, hey, your timer is really cool, but it needs to be able to track lap times, right? That's a perfectly acceptable thing for a customer of your software to say. And so we've just taken our original design and tweaked it a little bit until it worked in a better way. Nice, huh? Timers are awesome. Oh, but we broke we broke our stop button, so let's fix that too. All right, so we'll just come in here and say clear interval timers timer. And so now it stops. And maybe what we're going to do is we're going to have our stop timer delete this unordered list. Or maybe it makes a new unordered list so we can track multiple people's laps. Let's do that next. So stop timer, we click this. We got to give our div an ID. So maybe we want to change this to a class. So because we want to have multiple in here. No, let's leave this ID for now. And let's change div. We'll say lap time splits. I don't know anything about racing terms. Andrew, is that a thing? Splits?
Yeah.
All right, cool. We're on the right track then. All right, so we've got a div that has an ID. We have an ordered list that has an ID. But when we click stop time, we want to create a brand new ordered list. So what we probably will do, where's our stop timer? So let's just take ourselves some notes as we build this. We're going to say grab current lap times list. Maybe remove its ID so that we can reuse it again. And then create new ordered list for the next cycle. All right? So let's just get that. So we'll say var ol equals document.get element id lap times. Okay, so we've got a reference to it. Let's just come in here and say ol.set attribute ID, and we'll make it like an empty string, right? So we don't need this ID anymore. And then we're going to do document.create element ordered list, and we'll maybe give it our new ol equals, and we will say new ol dot set attribute ID, and we'll give it lap times. So now, if we append that to document.get element by ID lap time splits, is that what we named it? Lap time splits, yep. Dot append child new OL. We now have a brand new ordered list ready for our next timer. All right, so let's test this out, see if this works. Right? It's working perfectly. Let's stop the timer. Okay, that was interesting. It moved this over here. Why would it do that? What did we put? Oh, I know what the problem is. Check this out. Because we had our float assigned to our ordered list, as soon as I took that ID away from it, it stopped referencing this element. So let's change this to lap time split so that the div itself, and maybe what we do is we give this a background color so it looks different. We'll say like DDD, right? So like a light gray. And we'll do background border 1px solid FFF, right? So we got ourselves a right. So start, stop. splits. Okay, so we got our little box over here. That's where they're going to go. Okay, that's kind of working. Stop timer. Cool. So that worked. But there's a problem with our logic now because we stopped the timer. And if we look at timer, it still has a value in there. So it's never starting a new timer for us. Right? We're doing the clear interval timer here, but we're never resetting that value to null. Right? So if we do timer equals null, now the next time we click the start timer button, timer will be null again, and it will start the thing. We probably also want to change the value of the button, better future button, to be back to like start next. What is it when it loads? Start timer. Right. So we want to do document get element by ID. Better future button dot inner HTML equals start timer. Right. So it goes back to being the default. Right. Start next lap. Tracking some lap times. Everything's going well. When I click stop, it goes back to start timer. If I start this again, now it goes up to counting again. Now the problem is, when we stop the timer, this value remains the same. So we probably want to clear that out as well, right? Okay, so we'll just do that very easily in here. Let's just give ourselves a comment so we know where we're at here. We'll say clear our timers and reset the main clock to 0. And so our main clock was in interval. So we'll just come in here and say document.get element by ID interval dot inner HTML equals 0. Okay. So let's check this out. Start next lap. Our laps are showing up on the right. Stop the timer. Goes back to 0. And there we go. Now we have lots and lots of really cool timer effects. Now, obviously, the more of these we do, the thing that jumps out to me if I was really building this, I would probably want to put each successive run of the timer up at the top. So I wouldn't want to use a pen child like that. But like these are minor nitpicky things. If we're just testing for functionality, like we did it. We built this in here, right? Works perfectly. We can track our lap splits. Now, because we were using super fast counting things here, we would probably want to make sure that our math is correct. So we'd want to verify that, like, if I do this for 2,500 seconds, like that this actually matches the real world numbers. So that would be one thing I'd want to take a look at probably. But other than that, pretty pleased with this. All right, any questions? Great question, Gregory. Thanks for sending us down a fun little rabbit hole of building lap timers. No? All right, it is 5:50. Oh, go ahead, Gregory.
Can you put time zones in timers?
Ha! That is an object. If you wanted to do that, that would be something that would exist in the date object. We looked at that. I don't know if you remember.
Yes.
Earlier, right? So new date. The date object understands time zones perfectly.
Okay.
So if you were wanting to build a clock or something, as an example, which is going to be one of the things in your homework, you're going to want to use the date object to set a lot of the default values up. And then the date object has a lot of things like calculating the time between two dates. And so what you might have your interval do as a function is that, like, every second or so, just calculate a new date and see what the distance is. Because the date object knows a lot of things, like date, new date, get hours. Right? So it's already got a lot of that information that you're going to need to, like, make this a real clock in its object.
Also, I know you made a timer to go down, like decreasing with 0, but can we also make a function that, like, once it hits 0, it does something to, like, know, like, hey, countdown has finished?
Yep. How do you think you would do it? We know that we can create an interval. The interval is just going to run whatever function we put in it, right?
Yes.
So and we know we can use JavaScript to do anything we want. We can change page colors, right? So here's a silly example. We got our interval, which is right here, right we start it. We can say something like, right, we got int value. Right, this is going to be our number. We can say if int value equals, or is greater than or equal to 10,000, document.body.style.background color equals red. Right? So now if I start this timer, oh, I mistyped document. Okay. Document. As soon as it gets to 10,000, it's going to change the page red. Right? You could do this in either direction, right? Because we're controlling this being displayed here. So if we wanted to make this count down from 10,000, when it gets to 0, change your page to red. Do whatever you want. Oh, our button still doesn't show back up. That's sad. I should have picked a smaller number for this example. We'll be there soon. Anyway, it is 5:53. Let's take a break as soon as this turns red, and we'll come back at 6:10. Gosh, that's very red. We start the recording. Excellent. So that was timers in JavaScript. Now the next thing that we're going to cover today is JSON. What is JSON? We've talked about it a few times. This is what it means. But what does JSON mean to you? Do you have any ideas or guesses?
I know it's a file type.
Okay, close. It's not a type of file necessarily, though it could be a file that is JSON. JSON is just a agreed upon method for us to talk to other computers. And so it literally stands for JavaScript Object Notation. We've been using JSON kind of this entire time, right? So whenever we make an object, like I'll go with some comments, make an object. Right? We'll do var object equals, and then we do curly brackets. Everything that is in here is in JavaScript Object Notation, essentially. So if I put in Eric, or let's make this a real object, right? Name, Eric, age, 37. Favorite pet, right? Maybe I pick snake.
So when you use object, I've seen you use it before. That's just you coming up with the name for it, not that it's a needed, like it's supposed to be called object.
Yeah, correct. I'm trying to pick names that are real, right? So if I'm, you can see when we were playing with the timer, for example, we changed this variable name 4 times. So when it was an array, I made it timers. When I change it not to be an array, I change it to timer, specifically because to me, the way we name variables, the way we name functions, the way we name objects and arrays is useful for me when I'm reading the code to know what is supposed to go in there. So when I use object like this, obj, that's just a shorthand way for me to say this is an object, right?
Okay, so you could call it a potato and it'll still work the same way?
Yeah, person, potato, perfect, right? Now there is a variable called potato that exists on our page, potato. Oh, I did not put it in the global scope. Let's make this line up. Cool. So now if I type potato in here, that is an object. Okay. JSON specifically is how we're going to communicate that this object exists to other servers and as a way to store information. So JSON is us turning this object into a string. And the way we do that is we use the JSON object, right? So it's called JSON .stringify, which is a function, and we can pass in any object we want. So if I put in potato, it's going to return a string that is going to look familiar. It's going to look like a JavaScript object, but it's got everything. It's got slashes so that the quotes are escaped. And then we could send this around, right? So I could go var JSON object equals JSON.stringify potato, and now we have this string. And so what we're going to do with this object, or this method later on, is we're going to take our JavaScript objects, whatever object we've created, and we're going to turn it into a string so that we can send it to servers and have servers send back JSON objects to ourselves, right? So this is a string right now. Right now I can't do anything with it. If I wanted to say JSON object.name, which would, when we actually care about this as a data object, that should say Eric, right? But this is a string. It's just a big line of text. Go ahead, Andrew.
So is there an unstringify for when you get it back?
Exactly. And that one is JSON.parse. And if we put in JSON string, or JSON object, right, it returns exactly like a JavaScript object. Okay? Most programming languages, and I don't want to say all, but most programming languages that are in use today are going to have some easy-to-use function or method to turn things into objects and strings in JSON format. JSON has become a bit of a de facto standard for how we communicate amongst servers. And so, if this was PHP, PHP has one that's like JSON encode, which turns a PHP array into a JSON string. And then it also has JSON decode, which does the reverse, which takes a JavaScript string and turns it into a PHP object. So even though the name is JavaScript object notation, it's because JavaScript, the language that we're learning, popularized that format, where it's like, two squiggly braces, and then it's a bunch of key value pairs. But then Python, PHP, Ruby, C++, they all have functions or methods or libraries that will let us convert native data types, so like actual arrays and objects in that programming language, into a JSON string so that we can send it to another server. Okay? So, so we had our JSON object, which we turned into a string. This is a JSON string, and we can use JSON.parse to turn it into a real object. And we can say like obj. Right? So obj is now a valid object we can do stuff with. So a great example of this, and we might even explore that in a little bit if you want, would be we could have a big form, right? What was our project we were working on yesterday? We had a nice big form full of stuff. What did we call it? Week 5, maybe? I should start naming these things better, huh? Does one have a form? Yeah, this one had like our phone and our find or replace. This is perfect. So open with live server. All right, so we got this big form, right? And it's got a phone number, a find, a replace. What you'll generally do, and maybe you'll even do this with as an event, right? Is that you'll come in here and you'll write some code that says, when the submit button is pressed, right? We've got all this validation code in here. When the submit button is pressed, we might want to go and say, let's call var form values equals like an array like that, and we might even come in here and say, what do we call it? Phone, find, and replace.
So what would the comment for this one be? What are we doing?
I'm not doing anything yet because I don't want you to remember this. We're just trying to show some examples, and then we'll build something intentionally that would have a comment, right? So just for now, just look and follow along, and then we'll actually put this into practice in a real way. I'm just trying to maybe provide some examples of how this would be used. Good question, though. Thank you for keeping me honest. All right, so we would maybe come in here and say, what was documented? We got to find our form button here. We're inside the phone changer. So what is this submit button called here? Submit, input type submit. We'll give it an ID so we can attach it. ID equals cool submit. All right, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make a new event listener. And I'm going to say document dot get element by ID cool submit dot on or add event listener. Click. All right, we got a function. Everyone's following along so far? We're just attaching an event to this button. So what we will do with JSON objects pretty often is that we'll have our objects in here. We'll say var form values equals that. We'll say phone, find, place, right? So when I click the submit button, let's prevent the form. Let's false. We don't actually want to submit the form. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say var. What are all of our fields called? Phone, find, and replace. Good. We gave ourselves easy names here. So I'll say phone is document.get element by ID, phone dot value, comma, and we'll do the same for all three of these. Find and replace. Find, replace. And just to make sure that this is definitely not going to submit, let's change this from being a submit button. We'll just do input type equals button. Okay. I don't want this form to accidentally submit and do its default behavior. Right. So we can see if I click this button, if we pull up our console here, we can console.log form values. Okay. And when I click, might put some. Oh, that's an invalid phone number. That's fine. You can see we've created an object that has information about the form in it, right? We went and took the values of those elements and we shoved them in an object. Now, this form by default is automatically going to submit to this other page because it is a regular form. That's how forms work. But if we were writing JavaScript to take all this information and send it to some server somewhere else on the internet, we might want to use a different method to do that. And the way we would do that is we would take these form values and just change it into a JSON string, and so we'd do like JSON.stringify form values, and then our to-do comment for ourselves would be like, grab the form as a JSON string to send to cool server somewhere else, right? So that when I type in phone numbers in here, 219 whatever, right, and we put it Eric weird, and I click submit, I've got this string that I can just directly send to another server, and it's going to do on its end whatever version of JSON.parse that it has. And so if the server is written in Ruby on Rails, it's going to have a JSON method, and it's going to turn that into an object so that we can shove it in a database. Everyone following along? JSON is super, super, super powerful, and we're going to play with that in an interesting way right now. So let's build something with JSON. Oh, so we're building this timer, right? We've got this interesting little timer, and we've got all these lap values. If I wanted to turn all these lap values into an array and shove it somewhere, we're going to use JSON to store this in a good format, right? So let us open up our other project again. Close you. Oh no, I closed all of Visual Studio Code. That's annoying. VS Code. Okay. What? Code provide features that may honor. That's fine. Yes. I trust all the authors. I believe in myself. Alright. So we got this file. We need to go live again so that. Oh no. Wait, I'm in the wrong folder. You silly. What was the name of this? JS events. There we go. So now we're in the right place. Go live. Right, we're right back where we were. So we have this interesting thing. We click start timer. It does it. It records some laps. So we want to store all that information in a JSON object, right? So let us do that first. So we've got our laps. Great. So what we probably need to do right now, all we're doing is we're adding those laps onto the HTML page. But we need to use this in JavaScript. So we're going to start storing these in, right, so we've got, right, we're checking the times, we're adding those elements. Let's create ourselves a variable to store our times, right? So we'll do var lap splits equals an object, right? And we'll say store all of our lap split times in here for JSON, okay? I want to turn off this thing that's turning our page to red. That's driving me crazy. So let's take that out of there. Okay, great. So we've got this object up here. And let's take out this potato guy. So I've got my lap splits, right? And lap splits is gonna be structured like this. So we can add a comment in here and be like, so the first key of this is gonna be like the 0, right? So the very first time it runs, we're gonna have, or maybe we just say lap 1 or trial 1. Right, so every time we click this start timer button, it's starting us into a new one of these things. And now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, all right, this is its own object, and each time, oh, maybe we make this an array and see what happens. Right, so we're going to do an array first. And so each value that we record, we're also going to put it on the page, but we're going to just put in stuff like 0.7, right, and the next one would be like 0.9, right, all that information we were capturing. And then the next time I click start button, it'll make trial 2, right, with another array. So that'll be my format here. All right. So we are starting the timer right here for the first time. No, if timer equals null, right? So perfect. This creates the first one. But we only record lap times when we lapped at least one time. So it's going to happen right in here. We're getting this value right here. Okay. But first we need to let's be explicit about this. Let's say generate the current lap time, and then we need to write that lap time to our object, and then we'll need to display lap times on the page. Right? We've already got that part handled. This does that. Right? So we can put that right there. But we want to generate the lap time. So let's make that and put it in a variable. So we'll say var current lap time equals this. Okay. And then we'll put that here. Current lap time. But we need to write this to our object. Okay, and right now our object does not have this field in there, so we're going to need to make this as well. So every time I click the start button for the first time, start timer, I need to generate that value. Right, so let's give ourselves a, we'll say var, we'll say current trial. We'll say var trial. So each time I'm in race 1, maybe trial is not a good name, but maybe we want to rename this as race, like race 1, race 2, race 3. I'm not sure, but I'm going to stick with trial for now. And so we're going to say whatever my current trial is going to be some number that will let me generate this value. So I'll say var trial equals 0, right? Because we start off as, we haven't even started a race yet. So I need to increment that when I start it for the first time. All right, so if timer is null, if we're not running a trial, the very first thing I want to do is I want to say trial equals trial plus 1. Okay, and now this trial variable is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So whatever one I'm currently in, I can write it to that object. So I'll say var, or actually I can do, what do we call this variable? We said lap splits. Lap splits. And then we'll say trial dash plus trial. Right, so this is going to be a string plus a number is going to make like trial dash 1, trial dash 2. And then we say, we know this is going to be an array, right? So we can do just push current lap time. Okay, but we haven't made this an array yet, so that's a step we're missing. So up here when we're creating the trial, we want to make this an empty array. So we can do lap split, lap splits, and we do the same format, trial dash plus trial, and then we just make this an empty array, equals nothing. So we click the button. If the timer is off, we're going to do trial equals trial plus 1. So we started at 0. So our count is going to go trial dash 1, trial dash 2, trial dash 3 every time we start and stop a timer completely. Perfect. That all is the same. But then when we're doing our lap split times, before we were just putting it on the page. Now what we're doing is we're grabbing that value and then storing each value in this array. Okay, and then we're still going to display it to the page because that's important too, right? We want to show like this is interactive. We're doing some stuff. So let's test it out. We'll pull up our little JavaScript console so we can look at this value. Clear. All right, start timer, stop timer. Right. So if we stop, let's look at what trial has right now. Right, it's got 1, as expected. It started at 0, now it has 1. Let's look at lap splits. Right, we've got trial 1 with an array. It's got 0, 5, 2, 8. That's right, 9, 3, 8, 1, 1, 0, 8. Now let's just test out JSON.stringify to see what it was going to do. So we'll do JSON.stringify lap splits. And it creates a JavaScript object notation string that we could theoretically send somewhere. Let's create another one. Yep, so we're on trial 2, right? So we can trial 2, and we can verify that we have an empty array in there by running lap splits, right? We can say that trial 1 has an array with 3 times, trial 2 has an array with 0 times. Looks like it's working pretty well, right? And let's just give ourselves 3 more, and we'll stop. Right, so trial 2, race 2, whatever we want to call this, was obviously quite a bit slower than race 1. That's fine. Maybe we have the fast runners go first and the slow runners go second. But now, if we do JSON.stringify lap splits, now we can see that we've got trial 1 with those values, trial 2 with those values. So that works perfectly. So what we would probably do in a real world environment is we got our lap stuff. We probably would make a button. There's a couple ways you'd go about this. If we were building this as real product, we would probably, as soon as you click the stop timer thing, you'd probably most likely record the results. But we're going to be intentional about this. So let's say we wanted to send this to a server, right? We're going to come in here and let's add another button. Let's take out our prank. We don't need that anymore. Let's take out this button, these buttons, and let's say button ID equals store times, right? And we'll just say store times button. Okay, so now we've got a button that will store times for us, and we probably want to. We got to remove all of our prank buttons and future buttons. Let's take those out. Prank button. Yeah, cool. All right. And we can also notice we've still got this one called better future button. Now would be a perfect opportunity to call this start timer. Right. So let's rename this start timer. Perfect. So now it matches logically with what we're trying to build here. Okay. And we probably missed one, right? Yep, start timer. Do we not save? Start timer. There we go. Good. All right. So we have a start timer. That works. We're tracking our laps. That works. We stop it. Cannot set property inner HTML of null. What is this one? Oh, so we still have better future button over here. Start timer. So when we click this store times, we want that to generate that JSON string and then maybe display it somewhere. So just for the purposes of this, because we don't know about sending stuff to servers yet, let's just make a little element in here. Let's make a div. We'll say ID equals server debug. And the reason we're going to call it this is we're going to put this JSON object in here and so that we can verify that it's being created correctly. So we'll do /div, and maybe we want this to be styled so that it's a little bit better looking. Right? Maybe we'll do server debug, and we'll say padding 10px, color white, background color. Maybe we want to make this a super darky, so we'll say something like 444, right? That's too light. 333. Okay, and then we'll say border 1px solid FFF. Okay, and maybe we want to put a little bit of margin in here, so we'll do 10px as well. Right. So we've just created this little thing in here, and maybe what we need to do. Yeah, that's perfect. Right. So when we click the store times button, we want something to happen. So let's make ourselves a new event listener, and we'll say, hey, prototype the store time on server mechanism. Okay, so we'll say document.getElement by ID store times. Is that what we called it? Store times. Yep. Dot add event listener. Click function E. Okay, perfect. So what do we need to do to store our times? A, we need to get the values of that array. So let's say turn the lap split object into a JSON string. Send it to a server. Okay, and then maybe when the server responds, clear the object and clear the page times. Right. So what we're going to do here, we're going to take that object that we've created, send it to the server, though we don't know how to do that necessarily, but we're going to like simulate it by putting it into this page here. And then we're going to use a timer to essentially say like wait 3 or 4 seconds and assume that it was stored on the server. The server is going to tell us yes, it was stored. Once we get that confirmation, we're going to clear the time list on the right, like the ones that are in this little gray box, and we're going to reset that object so that it's fresh. Okay, so maybe what we'll have this do is this debug, this log here, we'll maybe have that continue to add to itself so that we can just see like these are all the things we would have sent to the server. Okay, all right, so how do I turn the lap split object into a JSON string? What function would I use for that? Any ideas?
JSON.stringify.
Yep. Lap split. Is that what we call it? Yeah, lap splits. Let's make sure our comment matches our name. Right? Lap splits. What do I need to do? I need to put this somewhere, right? So I'm going to create a variable, maybe. What should we call our variable? Who's got a good name for us? Estrella, what should I name my variable?
Stored laps.
Okay, stored laps. Sure, makes sense to me. I might want to put in here like stored laps JSON, just so I know, hey, when I see this variable, it's that. But stored laps is perfectly good as well, right? It's up to us, and this is where we get to be a little bit creative, right? We're writing code for ourselves. So stored laps, perfect. Send it to the server. I don't know how to do this yet, so we'll just say to do, and I'll maybe put my initials in here, and I'll say actually send this to the server in the future, right? But for now, if I wanted to just put this stored lap string on this page, right? How would I do that? What did we call this element? Server debug. Leah, how do I put something in server debug?
What was it again? The server.
Server debug is server debug.
It's a like ID or sorry.
Yeah, that's an ID.
Okay. A div.
Yeah.
Okay, like a pen child.
Oh yeah, we could. So we'd have to create an element. That's
yeah.
one way. So how do I create an element? What kind of element do I want to create to put in there if I want to use a pen child?
Probably just a P.
Oh sure. P equals document dot create element P. Right? And then I could do P dot what? So I created an element, but right now it's empty. but I want to put this string in there, right?
Inner text equals stored labs.
Sure. Okay. And then you said server debug is a div. If I want to do this, you said use append child, right? How would I append child to that?
Could you do p.append child stored labs?
No. This won't work, but why will it not work? You're heading down the right path. This was a good suggestion. We created an element, we called it P. We put inner text in there, we put the string in there like you suggested. That was good.
Oh, it's it not p, it's document dot get element by id what was it again?
Server debug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. That should work. And then we could probably test this real quick. So let's just stop. Okay, append child of node parameter 1 is not of type node. Oh. P. Yeah, we have to append child. It has to be an element that needs to be like create element, right? So now this will work. So if I do start timer, give ourselves some laps, stop timer. Did it actually do it? Oh, I have to click the store button. All right, perfect. We can see this is our string that we would theoretically send to the server. Okay, so that part's cool, right? And then maybe we'll we got the to-do in here that says when we learn how to send stuff to the server, we'll do that next. Okay, so let's assume that right, maybe sending to the server takes 3 seconds. What can I use to simulate waiting 3 seconds? Or maybe we want to have it be some random time, right, between 0 and 5 seconds. If I wanted to do something in the future, how would I do that?
Set interval.
Set interval. That's a good one. But set intervals is going to do it how many times? So let's try it.
It's gonna
set interval.
It's gonna keep going, right?
Yeah, set interval will run forever until we clear the interval.
So we want to set timeout.
Yeah, for the purposes of this, yeah, set timeout is perfect. So let's say set timeout, and we need a function in here, right? So let's just make an anonymous function real quick. All right, so we got a function here, and then the second argument is what? It's the time. So what kind of time? How long do we think the server is going to take to respond here?
You said 3 seconds.
Okay, so how many? What number would I put in here to be 3 seconds?
3,000.
3,000. Perfect. All right. So when the server responds, clear the object and clear the page times. All right. So how would I clear this object? If I wanted to make this object lap splits, have nothing else in it now.
I want to say something like parse, but I feel like that's not with this.
We did
Could you
learn
just-
parse. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you just do lab splits equals and then the curly braces and that's it?
Yeah, that should work. Now, there's probably going to be a problem with this, and we'll get to that in a second, but that's exactly the right direction. Parse, which Selena suggested, is how we would read that string if we were on the server. So when we do get to backend programming, we will need to use JSON.parse to like figure out what was actually sent to us. But for now, all right, so we cleared out lap splits. That should be good. And then we want to clear out this element over here, right? And that element was called what? Inspect. We have it in a div called lap split times. Right, lap time splits. So we could probably just empty that out, right? Like document dot get element by ID lap split times dot inner HTML equals nothing, right? And maybe what we want to do is we'll just verify that this happened, and so we can come in and say console.log the server save was correct. Right? Just it's always fun to log to ourselves. All right, this looks pretty good. Let's test this and see what happens. Start timer. Start next lap. We're gonna put a few things in there. Let's stop the timer. Let's make a second one. Start timer. All right, so we've got a few things in here. Great. Stop timer. Now let's take a look at all of our variables. So we've got lap splits. Right, that's our array. Everything looks good there. Now if I click store times, we should see a string here, right? Okay. Great. And in about 3 seconds, ooh, okay. Cannot set property inner HTML of null. If we click on this, lap split times dot inner HTML. Did we name our things incorrectly? Oh, lap time splits. Gosh. Lap time splits. So let's just recreate that behavior real quick. Okay, good. Do another one, good. And let's clear this out so that our console is empty. I click this little clear console button, and I'm gonna click store times. We're gonna wait 3 seconds. We should see now no errors. All right, that disappeared. That's pretty good. The server save was correct. We got that message. Let's look at lap splits. All right, and that is an empty variable, right? So we're good. We did all the things we set out to do. Now, the problem is going to be if we click start timer now, we no longer have a UL that we can store our times to, right? And so we should start seeing some errors, right? Cannot read property of event child of null. So the problem is we cleared this out too aggressively, right? We said inner HTML equals whatever, but there's no ordered list in here now. So how would we want to add? How would we want to fix that problem? We need this element, right? We need this element to exist.
Would we do the action on the parent rather than the child element?
What do you mean by that?
I remember we talked about this at some point, saying that what we did basically
so lap time
takes
splits
the element away.
Already the parent. So when we're clearing that out, it's
Okay.
removing, because remember we're creating these ordered lists. Like this is the first one that's there, but as soon as I stop the timer, I make a new one.
There needs to be one.
Yeah, we're adding
There
multiples.
needs to. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So we've emptied everything out, which is what we want, but we need one to be there for our regular timer to work.
Mm-hmm.
So how would I go about adding one of those here so that we don't lose it?
You could just copy the child's in there in your HTML. Can you just paste it into the inner HTML right there?
Like this? Copy this? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly what I would do. The other way we could do this would be the JavaScript create object way, right? So we just emptied this out. We could have just right under here said, var ol equals document. Right? It's the same stuff we did down here to create it in the first place. Right? We could have done that in there as well. Both are correct, but I like doing it all in one line. So we'll just do ol. Yeah, perfect. So let's take this out. And now, if we run this, let's just clear everything out. We're good. Start timer. Right. Give ourselves some objects here. Good. Make a few more. This one's got a bunch. Now we store times. We have this string here that we're going to send to the server, and in a few, now everything's gone. But we can start it again. Right. Stop. Let's send a second set of times. Perfect. So we've just kind of simulated a functional app doing something useful and sending times to the server. Now, the server, we're going to learn how to write that code when we get into the back-end portion of that. It's going to be a lot of the same stuff we're doing here, but we're not going to be focused on what it looks like. The server can, in some cases, be as simple as listen for a request on this website or on this address, take some JSON string that is sent to me, and shove it into a database, and then send back a OK or a success. Or if there's an error, send back a, hey, you put in too many times. So sometimes backend code is even easier to write because we don't have to worry about what it looks like. We can just process the information, and we would end up writing similar types of code to this. We would write comments, and we would structure it and say, grab the JSON object, parse it into a real object, loop through those results, and put it in a database. Send back a response. It could be maybe 5 lines of code. And now we've got something stored forever. And then maybe what we would want to do is, when I load this page for the first time, maybe there's a look at my results by day thing. And so we would ask the server, hey, please send me my last time set. And it's going to send us a JSON object. And we would maybe have to put this in here. Okay? It's kind of pretty simple, right? Okay. Everyone understands JSON. Is there anything you'd like to explore? We're going to use this more in the next little topic that we're covering. But I want to make sure that we spend enough time here for you to feel real comfortable. There's really just 2 things. JSON dot, what's the first one?
Stringify.
Stringify, and that turns an object into a string, safe for us to send around. And the other was, Selena, do you know the answer to this one? JSON dot
Potato.
JSON dot potato.
Parse.
Yeah, JSON parse. And that's going to turn a string, right? We could copy this string here, right? This is what makes it really cool, is that it's very easy to store strings, right? Old formats like CSV, XML, how we used to send stuff, those are formats that are more difficult and more challenging to work with. JSON.parse is really easy because it's easy to read, easy to look at, and it's easy for programming languages to turn into native data types. Right? So we can come in here and var stir equals, right? Paste that in, stir, and we can say JSON.parse stir, and now we have an object. Right? Real easy. Go ahead, Andrew.
Is JSON how we're going to handle all of our data? Like, what if you wanted to store an image or a video or audio?
JSON is a terrible format for images, audio. Those are binary files, sets of binary type. JSON is really, really good at the default native types, right? So numbers, strings, arrays, objects of objects. It's excellent at that. But when we're sending things like files, like an image or a movie, you might send a JSON object that says, here is a link to that file. So we might have an object in here that says something like var results equals success equals true. Right? So this might be a response from a server, and it'll say something like, uploaded image equals https images.google.com/image.jpg, right? So we wouldn't actually send the image back in JSON. I have an extra semicolon here. But what we would have is a URL that we could then directly insert into an image, right? So let's actually pick an image that is real so I can show this off. What was placehold it, right? Or Unsplash is a good one. Unsplash. Right, these are like real images. So let's, yep, right. So we've got this image address right here, right? Yep. Perfect. So your server, let's actually do results.uploaded image equals, and we'll paste that in. So we'll get a response that looks like this, right? It's probably going to look like this: JSON.stringify results. Okay. What we're going to do with this is then we would run it through JSON.parse, so that we actually turn this into an object, which we have right now, results, And we would probably do something like var img equals document dot create image element image dot source equals results dot uploaded image 403 forbidden. Oh, I probably need this string here, huh? The full thing. Image. Let's see results. Uploaded image. Right. So whatever that that server is making us send in the string so that we can use it. So if I do image.source equals results dot uploaded image. Perfect. And then we would do something like document dot get element by ID server debug dot append child image. Right. So we're not going to actually send the image as a binary file because this could be megabytes, right? It's not the appropriate format for that. But you will see, the URL itself included in that object so that you can use it and make use of it. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. 7 o'clock. Let's take a quick break. Come back at like 7:15. And we'll dive into the last thing we're looking at today, which is local storage. Okay? 7:15. See you in a bit. All right. So we've learned about JSON today. JSON is our way to turn objects into strings and do stuff with them. And why it's important to know this is that we're going to evaluate our first place to store data long term, right? So later on we're going to learn actually using databases and actually using SQL. But there is an excellent client-side API called local storage or session storage. They do two separate things that let us store data in the user's browser and then retrieve it later, right? So let's just quickly evaluate one of these things, right? So I can do session storage dot set key set item, and we give it a key. So we'll say like name. We can put in Eric, right? So if we look session storage dot get item name returns Eric. The cool thing about session storage is that I can close this page, reopen it. Okay. If I pull back this console here, I can do session storage dot get item name, and it's going to say Eric. Okay. So we can very quickly and easily store information that we want to use long term into session storage, and it will be there for us, or into local storage, and it will be there for us. Now, there are local storage dot get item name. Okay, there is another one called local storage, and we can do local storage dot set item, and we'll say name. We'll say Andrew. Right? Local storage dot get item name is going to return Andrew. So session storage and local storage are different. Session storage get item name, right, has the word Eric. The difference between the two, I don't know if I can show it off easily without breaking everything. Session storage only exists for the time in which my browser is open. If I close my browser and I come back to this page, session storage will be empty. Local storage is persistent. It's going to store in here until I clear it. So local storage is generally what you want to use for things that if you're trying to save information locally, you're going to put it in local storage. Okay? Go ahead, Gregory.
Is local storage like your cookies?
My what?
As your cookies.
It's kind of like cookies, and we'll talk about cookies here in a minute, because before local storage and session storage existed, we would always use cookies to store information like this. And we'll talk about cookies. Cookies are a whole, we could spend a week talking about cookies because cookies have gotten complicated in that there are a lot of consumer laws and regulations depending on where you live that make using cookies a challenge. However, local storage and session storage are safe for us to use to make our apps better. But cookies are a different thing. though they can be used for that same sort of stuff as well. We are going to talk about that today, but I just want to make sure we focus on this first. So, what was the difference between local storage and session storage?
Session only
Local
stores it
storage
during the
say
current session.
Andrew, yep. What were you saying?
Session storage stores it only during the current session. So once the browser's exited, it no longer exists. Whereas local storage stores it. It'll be there even after.
Correct. So let's say we've stored some stuff in local storage, right? We got the word name, local storage, get item, name, right? We can always local storage set item name, and we can change this to something else. We can say like the name is really supposed to be Leah, right? And so now if we do local storage get item name, it's going to say Leah. And we also have a function, though I don't use it, clear or remove item. So we can do local storage dot remove item name, and that's going to remove just that value. Right? So if we do local storage dot get item name, now it'll say null. We can also, if we had a whole bunch of information in local storage, we could do local storage dot clear and remove everything. Okay. So local storage is also, just like everything else in JavaScript, it's an object. So we can do local storage dot set item name Eric, right? Local storage dot set item age 37. Right? We can look at local storage and see what is in there, right? So this might be a fun experiment to play with on random websites. Pull up your console and just see if they're sending anything in local storage. You can also get there, I believe, from one of these menus like more tools, browsing data, probably under, yeah. So if we cancel this, let's just look at local storage. Browsing. Yeah, cookies and other site data. Where would this be? Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that there's a way to quickly see this in this menu, but I don't go in there very often, so I don't want to waste any of your time. But you can always come into the console and just type local storage and see what is in there. Same with session storage, right? Though session storage, is. Yeah. So apparently we've got session storage. This little this little Visual Studio Code thing that we're using. Remember this? That is letting us view this page. You remember that it's injecting all this weird JavaScript on our page that we've been just ignoring. This JavaScript is apparently storing some, right here. Session storage dot set item. Is this first time log from live server true? Right. So it's storing something in session storage that it's using to check to see if our page has loaded. Right. So there's stuff in here that we didn't put in there that one of our browser plugins or extensions is using. So those are two really interesting objects. Now, how does this relate to us as we build real products? Can you guys think of something else we've learned today that would maybe be really freaking useful to store in local storage, perhaps?
Can I give an example?
Yeah, go ahead.
For like your zombie tracker, you could store data of what was the last known zombie in the area of basically Florida or Georgia.
Yeah.
Same data.
We could have stored all that information so that as we're playing with the zombie tracker, wherever the infections are going up and the state is getting more complicated, we could store that in local storage. Another, the example I was thinking about today is we've got this store times button. We don't have a server, but it was creating JSON for us, right?
We could store those.
JSON would go great in here, right?
Yep.
All right, let's try that. So right here where we have, send it to the server, server debug, we know we still want to actually send this in the server, but maybe we put in another note that says, like, let's store this in local storage for now. Right? So instead of just appending it to server debug, right, stored lapse is already in JSON format, but maybe what we want to do is we want to go local storage dot set item and we'll call it, what is this called? Stored laps. And we'll say stored laps. Stored laps. Go ahead, Gregory.
It doesn't limit how much you can store in your local storage.
Yes. I don't know what that limit is. We'd have to look it up. It's a lot.
Oh, okay.
It's,
Can you upgrade it? Like, is it using your storage that's on the file or storage on your computer?
That's a great question for Google. Let's see. How much can I store in local storage? I have no idea. 5 megabytes total. The browser is, that is a, yeah. So 5 megabytes is apparently the answer, and you can't make that bigger or smaller. That's the limit. So 5 megabytes is an awful lot of text. That's half a book of text. That's 5 million characters. Okay? But the reason when we were talking, Andrew, when you asked the question of like, what if we wanted to send an image or if we wanted to send a video? 5 megabytes is not a very big image. That's like one nice resolution image. And that's one of the main reasons why we don't typically store binary files in things like this. But let's go back to our example, right? So we have local storage, right? It's got age 37. Let's clear this out because this is the stuff we put in here when we were filling around. So local storage now is empty. Let's create a timer, a bunch of timers. Right? Stop. Let's create another one. Stop. Let's store the times. Okay? So we got that in there. Local storage now has that JSON string as stored laps. So the cool thing about this is that, let's say, we don't actually have a server. We just want to build this so that it can store our lap times over and over and over again. Let's use this in a real world example, right? So we've stored this in here. Right, we've already cleared out the lap times. But maybe when we load the page the first time, we want this lap times element right in here. If there's anything stored in stored laps, we want to load those all in. That seems like a pretty cool little mini project, right? So, because if I load this page, local storage has this in here. We have all of our last time trials in here, but this is empty. But we can create elements with JavaScript, right? And we have all this data stored in here. So let's make it so when we load the page, we process it. So let's come in here. We already have, let's see. We already have an event that is looking for the page has loaded, right? So I think this is a great place to start. So let's say if we have saved lap information, let's load that into our lap split times. Okay? So we're going to say if local storage dot, what is it called? Stored laps? Or get item, get item stored laps. Right, because if we, right, we got local storage dot get item stored laps. That's going to return us that string. Okay, so it's going to be true if that's there. If we put something in here that was empty, right, it'd be like a stored lap. Right, that's not a thing. It's going to say null. Null is false. So we can just quickly say, if this is here, let's do something. Right? So what do we got to do first? Let's say first we're going to fetch the JSON string. Then we'll maybe need to like turn the JSON string into an object. Loop through all of the trials and turn them into ordered lists. Right? It's that simple. We're going to do 3 things. And then we probably have to have a subloop, right? So loop through the trial array and create list items for the times. All right, that seems like pretty good logic to me. So let's start at the beginning. So we know we have a string here, right? So we could have done this all in one big swoop, and that's what I would do generally. But we're going to do this line by line, like the slow way, just so we're really clear as to what is happening on each step of the way. So we know get item, right? This is already going to give us the thing, right? So let's do that first. So let's say JSON, we'll call this stored laps JSON string. All right, so this is going to be just a string. And we'll say local storage dot get item stored laps, right? And if we wanted to, right, we can do console.log stored laps JSON string, just to make sure that we're on the right track. And when this page loads now, we can see it does indeed log that string. Perfect. So we're right where we need to be. Now, what do we do to turn a JSON string into an actual object? Stored laps object.
Stored laps object dot. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Dot JSON dot parse.
JSON.parse. Stored laps JSON string, like that. Is that right? Good. Okay. So let's just check this, and let's make sure that stored lamp. Oh, it's not going to exist there because we're inside of a function, right? So the scope of this is local to this function. If we wanted to check to make sure this existed, we could put this in window, right? So if we load this page now, we do window.stored laps. Yeah, perfect. And we have our object. This is so when I'm working with an array or a JSON string for the first time, I'm almost always going to log this out so I can look at the data, right? So I know that I need my keys here are like trial-1, trial-2, right? We know this because we wrote it, okay? But if I was maybe using someone's API from another location, I'm going to refer to this so that I know what to start writing. So let's just kind of keep this up and see if we can see this a little bit, right? So, we're going to put this, right? Turn the JSON string into an object. That's that, right? So, good. Okay, so now we need to loop through this object, right? Let's turn this back to var now that we know that's good. Loop through it. So how are we going to loop through an object? What is one of our object loop options? Estrella, any guesses? What type of loop would you maybe want to use?
Maybe the for loop. I know
Okay.
that goes to arrays.
Yep, for loop is a good one to pick. What kind of? So I've got an object and it has var obj equals trial-1, and it's an array of some kind. It's got trial2. It's an array of some kind. What kind of syntax am I going to put in the for loop in our little thing there to just, I want to get trial1, trial2, and maybe a link to the array. Any ideas? Anyone? We can make a guess that's wrong as well, right? Like that's not a problem. What is a type of loop? Go ahead, Andrew.
So when I was studying last night, I saw someone use a for each loop or for each method for the array to move through an object.
Okay, let's try that.
And that seemed like a more less lines of code type way to do it.
Okay, so for each is we have to provide it a function, right? So
yeah, so it so objects for each function. So
for each is a function that exists on arrays and other things that are like node list, HTML document list. It's not a thing that exists on objects, just the native object.
Okay.
That's a great guess. We could turn this into an array that would have that type of thing on it, but that seems like a lot of extra steps because there's a really clean way to do this with a simple for loop. Does anyone remember? What are some of the types, right? So we know that we can do like for var I equals 0, right? This one is like the default for loop. This is super good for dealing with arrays. But there was one that was specific to JavaScript objects that is perfect for this use case.
For key and ob.
Yeah, exactly. So we do for var key in ob, right? Console.log key. Yeah. And we can also see that from here we can do console.log ob with key as inside its square brackets, right? So now we can see, yeah, perfect. We get trial 1, trial 2, and we get those 2 arrays. So this, when you think of objects, someone raise their hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you go back so we can look at that for code?
Yep. And we're going to write this in the editor right now, if you want to see it like in a real example.
Okay.
Okay. So for arrays, you're going to want to do like a for var I equals whatever. You're going to want to use a for each. There's a bunch of ways to loop through arrays. But for objects specifically, the one to always remember is it's for var key in and then the name of the object. So stored labs object, right? Because the key is always going to be whatever the key is, right? So in this object's case, it's trial 1, trial 2, and if there was 1,000 keys in here, it's going to, every single one is going to loop through here and tell us the thing, okay? And then it's in that object, so it's the key in that object. And then from in here, right, we can access this, right? So the key equals trial dash whatever, and so we'll put trial dash pound, and then the stored laps obj key equals array. Right, so that's how we operate on this. So let's just make sure that we're working right. Let's do console.log key. Okay, and we can see that it looped and it gave us trial 1, trial 2. So that part's working well. Let's keep that the same. Okay, so we need to loop through all the trials and turn them into ordered lists. So we're looping through the trials already. So we need at least 2 ordered lists. And we need to put them in lap time splits. So let's take this note, turn them into ordered lists, and put them in the div, right? Lap time splits. So how do we want to create our ordered lists? How do I create a new ordered list? We can do it a couple different ways, but one way is probably easier to do in a loop like this. Or maybe it'll help if we. So we're looping through all the things, we're turning them into ordered lists, and then we want to put them in the div lap time splits. So how would I create a new element?
Document.create element.
Perfect. Let's do that way. All right, so I've got a trial 1, trial 2. So I need at least, well, in this version, we've got two keys, 2 objects. The object has trial 1, trial 2, but it could have 15. Doesn't matter how many it's in there. So the very first thing we probably want to do is we're going to make, let's say, OL, right? We can name this whatever we want, but if I'm making an object or an HTML element, naming it what I'm actually making makes it really easy to follow along, right? So I could be equals document dot create element, and we'll say OL. Okay, next. I probably want to give these an ID so that if I need to, I can access them later. Yeah, just as being safe. So let's maybe do ol.set attribute ID And we've already got this beautiful key that has trial 1, trial 2. That to me feels like that'd be a perfect ID. Okay, so we got an element. It doesn't have any list items in it, right? We've got that as a thing to say loop through the trial array, because we know that the trial array is right here, and we have comment loop through it and create list items for these. So, you know, kind of the thing that jumps to mind when I'm looking at this, right? We know that we can come through here. We've got the lap time splits. Let's just do this first. So we're looping through here, and let's just go document.get element by ID, lap time splits, and we'll take out the pound sign, and we'll do append child, and we'll say OL. Right, so every time this loops, it's going to create a new ordered list. Okay, and we can just verify that that worked. We're going to have to inspect this element, and we can see, yeah, it's got a lap times one, and it's got a trial 1, trial 2, which is interesting. Okay, but all of these are missing their list items, right? So we need to do something with that. So let's take a crack at that part. So let's just say that part works. Okay, maybe we'll say and put them in lap time splits. We're happy with this. Okay, so now I need to loop through the trial array and create list items for the times, right? So we're going to need to get this value out of there. How do we want to do that? We want to loop through it again? Let's try that. Boop. Alright, so I know now that like my times equals stored laps object key. Right, so if I was to console.log this, just to make sure we're all chugging along. Yeah, I have an array of times. That's good, right? Alright. So now I need to loop through those items, right? So this is an array, times. So I need to loop through each one of those elements and create a list item, right? So let's loop through. How do we loop through an array?
For each.
Okay, well, you want to try for each, times dot for each. Right? And we know that this takes a function. Okay. And the what is it going to pass us? It's going to pass us the element, right? Whatever was there. So maybe we'll call this time. Okay. Okay, and then what do we need to do? We need to create a list item, right? So let's call it var li equals document dot create element li. Oh, gosh, stop it! I have got to turn off this IntelliSense because it's driving me crazy. All right, li. All right, and then it's perfect. I need to add this list item. Right, so let's do, we also need to put the time in, right? So what was the format when we do this timer? Right? So we put lap colon and the time. Right, so we know we have the time, 005, 0096. But I want to put, how can I add some text in the middle of this li?
li.innerText.
Sure, inner text. And we'll do lap colon plus time. Right? That should work. Alright, and then, okay, add the li to our new ordered list. Alright, so we know we gave it an ID. That was pretty smart of us. Right? So, and we have the key here in this loop as well. So that was what we put in here. We said the key was the ID. So let's just append child to that, right? So let's do document.get element by ID key dot append child li. Right? Does this all look correct to us? So we've got a loop up here. We're creating our ordered list. Then we've got a loop here. Then we're looping through the times, and we're creating our children, our LIs, and we're putting it to that newly created ordered list. Let's try this and see what happens. Do we all think this is good? Does anything here look wrong to us? Maybe you want to see both at the same time. Maybe I can make this a little smaller. Right, so we fetched the JSON string, We turned it into an object. We looped through the object. We created, we logged the key so we knew we were doing the right thing. We created an ordered list. We put the ID of the key as the ID of that ordered list, and we added it to that div. We verified that that worked by inspecting the element. We saw there was 2 empty ordered lists. But now we needed to loop through the trial array and create each of those list items. So we said, we did the same thing we did above. We looped through it. We got the array. Right? That was how we got the array out of this. We logged it, so we're seeing that yes, indeed, we do get arrays here. And then, who was it? It was Leah that suggested, hey, let's use a for each. Perfect. So we did that. We wrote a function. And now, for every one of those elements, it'll do 005, 009, or whatever. It's going to create a new LI. We're going to put the text in there, so it says lap, colon, whatever, which was the format we used in the other one. And we added it to our ordered list, right? Looks pretty good. Any questions? Any thoughts? Or do we just want to run it and see what happens? Run it? Hey, that looks pretty good, right? And every time I load this page, it's still doing all that logging stuff here, but it put in these things. Let's see if we can, all right, let's do local storage clear. Let's see if this happens. Let's put in some bigger ones, right? So now, if I reload the page, local storage is empty, right? It's empty. Perfect. Let's reload. Yeah, perfect. Nothing showed up. So let's try, yep, stop. Let's put a couple of these in here, right? So we're going to have, instead of just like 3, maybe what we should also do is, let's clear out these mouse event stuff that's firing so that we have this mouse event stuff. So we can keep our console clean. Okay, perfect. Alright, so now, start timer. So we made a bunch. Alright, so this is a huge list now. If we click store items, or store times, that's what's getting stored in local storage. It cleared it out, because we have that little thing pretending to be a server. Tells us the server save is correct. If we reload the page, man, that worked perfectly. Trial 1, trial 2, trial 3, trial 4, and we've got all that data there. Okay, perfect. So, what do we see about our code here? This code. So we checked if stored laps, and we're looping through it. What do we see here that maybe we could fix? Kind of between line 35 and line 64. Oop. Right. Kind of what's on the page right now. What do we see here that definitely could use some work maybe? Any thoughts? How does it make us feel? Estrella, is this the best code we could write? It's pretty good code, right? We got lots of comments everywhere. It looks clean. I like the way we name things. Does anything jump out at you as fishy?
Could you combine the two? Like, could you put the like in like they both both of the like for var key and stored laps obj, like those are both the same. Could
Okay.
you
So you're saying this for loop is the same as this for loop, and you're asking if we can combine them.
Yeah.
How would we combine them?
Could you just copy it all in there?
Copy what?
Like everything in the second one. What would
Everything
happen?
in the second one.
Yeah, what would happen if you just copied all that?
You want me to copy it or you want me to cut it?
Or yeah,
Cut.
or like cop or cop. Yeah, that works.
Okay, and just paste it in here anywhere?
Yeah, like at the end.
Okay, and let's try, so we want this second loop to not run, right? So let's just comment this
Yeah,
out for now. Okay, let's see
I
if
just
that
wanna see
works.
if that works.
Okay, I mean, it happens really fast, right? But it seems like it's still working. What does everyone else think about Leah's suggestion? Is it better to just have it in one loop like this? So we probably want to have, we want to copy our comment too, right? Telling us what we're doing. Oh, and look here. We said here, loop through the trial array, but we called the array times. Maybe we want to have these match. Let's just call it times. For each time. Right, so now our comment's better. And maybe we want to put this like above here when the section actually starts. Okay, what does everyone think about Leah's suggestion here? Structurally, I mean it's working obviously. Do we think this is better or worse than the previous version? And if so, why and why not? What do you think, Andrew?
As far as readability, I think it's better.
Okay. What do you think, Estrella?
I agree with what Andrew said, kind of like condensing it together makes
Okay.
it a little bit easier to follow.
Perfect. So A, we agree it's easier to read. What is the second reason this might be good or bad?
Maybe scope.
What do you mean by scope?
If we're in two separate for loops, maybe one variable is outside of another variable scope.
So you're worried about variable scoping? Yeah, I mean, that could be a concern, for sure. It's not in this case, because we literally copied the whole thing up. So we didn't have anything that was a conflict. But I think there's maybe an easier thing that is good or bad that we can talk about. Does anyone have any suggestions?
I noticed in the like console.log, like now it says child 3 and then it gives the like properties for child 3 and then it says child 4, then it gives the properties for that one. Before it was like it gave the like child 1, child 2, child 3 and then the properties for all that. So
Okay.
it's like more organized.
Oh, in here, yeah. But if we were building this for real production, probably one of our final steps would be to just come through here and delete these so that it doesn't put anything in the console. This is really just for us to debug and understand what's happening. Does anyone have any ideas of like why combining them may or may not be really good? I can give you a hint if you'd like. Would you guys like a hint?
Yes, please.
What would happen if stored lapse object was 5 megabytes long, our total maximum for session storage? Let's say we had 20,000 time trials. We're like, this product is used in the Olympics, and we're timing everything over 15 days. What is one of our concerns with the previous version if we had 2 loops?
Would that take up more space?
Nope. The space is handled by local storage, right? So let's assume that local storage can store the amount of data we have here. So it's got 20,000 records in here.
Is it like a timing thing on like how long it takes to go through it?
Absolutely. You got it, right on the head. If we're already looping through 20,000 items, we should never loop through the same thing again. Because if there's 20,000 things in there and we loop through it twice, we've looped through the items 40,000 times. If we loop through it 3 times, it'd be 60,000 times. This is a key performance step. Like, we have to loop through it. There's no way around it. We absolutely have to like look at each element in here because we're going to create some elements. But we shouldn't do it more times than we have to. This is if we did it multiple loops, it was a huge performance implication. And in the very first example, this one that we're doing, where we looped through 2 trials, this will probably never you'd build this, you'd test it, and you'd be like, oh, this works perfectly. And you're absolutely right. It works perfectly when we got 2 things in there. But if you had 1,000 things or 10,000 things, in the real world, this kind of thing would cause a problem. So if nothing else, start training yourself to think, if you've got a loop, you should never have a second loop of that. Having the second loop is perfectly fine. Like, we wrote our comments out and we just literally coded each thing along the way. But the very first thing that jumps out when you're looping through it a second time is that, hey, I probably need to combine this. Okay, so that's where we are right now. So we agree we don't want a second loop. It's for performance, and we also have the added benefit of we like that it's more readable, right? It's all in one spot now. What is another thing that jumps to mind? How can we optimize this even more? Let's imagine we've got 20,000 things in here, and each of those 20,000 things has 20,000 time events as well. So we had 20,000 races, or trials, or whatever we call them, as the top level. And then each of those races had, it was maybe the Daytona 500s. There's 500 laps. Is there anything we can... So this loop in here is running on each lap, but is there a more efficient way to maybe combine some of these things above us? Any ideas? All right, what if... All right, so let's just kind of step through this and see if anything jumps out at us. All right, so we create an element. We set an attribute on it. Then we write it to the page. Then we loop through, create more elements, put the text in the element, and then we write that to the page. Can we skip? What if this step, any append child, what if that took a second each time? Can we remove all of these steps?
So we want to write everything to the page at the same time?
Yeah. So these, the append child function works on any element object. This is an element object, and it stops really being an element object when we write it here. But let's just, for the sake of testing, let's move this down after our for each, right? Because remember, this is all happening inside the main loop, right? So we log the thing, we create our element, we set an attribute, then we get our times. Oop, no, that's fine. We get our times, then we log it, right? Then we're looping through that array. We're creating an element, we're setting an inner text. So instead of doing this one where we're getting an element from the page, what if we just say OL dot append child? Okay. And then at the very end, we just write our OL, right? So instead of doing 20,000 writes plus 20,000 writes for each of the individual things, right? That could be 80 million writes. We just write one time to the page with append child once on just the OL, and the OL is going to have a bunch of children under it, right? That's one way, right? Let's try it and see if this works. I think it's going to have a problem, but we won't know until we test. How do I make this not full screen? Where? What? How do I? Why? F11? Oh, there we go. All right, so let's reload. There we go. It seems to be working, right? Perfect. So instead of, the problem is this is doing document.getElementById. So it has to look at the document, find the element, and then append child to it. So just skipping that step entirely says we're going to create a fake document, or create a fake element, set an attribute on it, then we're going to loop through the times, create another fake element, put some information in it, and then append it to that thing that we've already created. So we only have to write to the page one time. That saved us a ton of steps. And if this was, 20,000 items, that might have shaved, 30 seconds off of this run. And, the only way to verify that would be we'd have to create a value that had 20,000 and then time both versions. But at the very least, this makes more logical sense, right? Rather than searching through the DOM looking for an element a bunch of times, we just have to find one element and append that child to it. So at the very least, we're saving this lookup step, which may or may not be slow. Pretty good? Everyone following along? What is another method we could have used instead of doing document.createElement and doing it this way? What's another thing we could have done with all of these, if we were so inclined? Any ideas? Is this the only way to put HTML on our pages? We know that we have this. This is our div, right? Lap time splits. If I wanted
Could you do inner HTML with it?
Yeah, we could. It might have been uglier, but let's test it. So let's say this is our loop. This loop is working, but let's how do I do this? Yeah, let's comment it out. All right, so that one's good. So we have our key. All right, so let's just kind of. We know we want that, right? We know we want that. Okay. We probably need this. Perfect. Right. So we want to use inner HTML. Let's test this. Inner HTML equals something. Right? Okay. So we've got our key. We know that we have this element. So let's start building some HTML. We need this to be an ordered list, and it's got to be a bunch of ordered lists, right? So we're looping through all of this stuff. So let's just start with a variable. Let's start with a string. Maybe we start with var HTML output equals, right, perfect. So we know we need an ordered list, and we know we wanted to have an ID of key, right? Perfect. So we start there. So I've started my opening tag, and it's going to go in HTML output. Perfect. Now I go in here times for each, and I want to add to that output. So I'm going to come in here and say HTML output equals HTML output plus li, and then what do we have? Log. Is that what we did? Yeah, lap colon, and then plus time plus /li. Right. So first we're creating an HTML string that has OL, ordered list, with a key in it. Then we're looping through using that same variable and just adding extra content on it. So we're building a string. And now at the end, once we're out of that loop, we need to close our ordered list, right? So we do HTML output equals HTML output plus /OL. Right? Looks pretty good. And then we could try, and we come in here and say HTML output. Now there's going to be a problem here, but let's see if this works a little bit first. Yeah, so we got one of them. What is the problem? We need to probably take whatever's in inner HTML first and add this string to it, right? So we could do something like this. Yep. Plus HTML output. It's the same thing we're doing up here, creating a bunch of strings. We're saying whatever's in there right now, let's add it. So that the first time it runs through this loop, this is going to say trial1 in this stored object. So it's going to say HTML output equals trial1. And let's log this out here. Right? Let's do console.log HTML output. So we know we have 2 keys, and what it's created is, we have 4 actually, right? So it says trial1, lap, whatever, blah blah blah. It added it. Then it goes to the next one, trial2, lap, whatever, trial3. So we're making HTML, and we're just pushing it into the inner HTML, right? So that's a second way you may do this. And it really, this is going to come down to preference. Like, which version of this do you like better? There's no right or wrong answer. So let's just maybe go around the room. Which version do you like better, Selena? This first version where we're doing create element a bunch of times, or would you rather work with HTML strings like this?
The second one.
Okay. Andrew, how about you?
I like when you actually do the strings and then do plus the variable.
Estrella. Oh, okay. Sorry, keep going. Yeah, you were explaining?
Oh, I like the flow of it better because I can almost see it a little bit better.
Okay. Estrella, how about you? Number 1.
I prefer the inner HTML.
Okay. Leah, how about you?
I prefer the creating element. Like the HTML one seems kind of like hacky to me.
Okay. Hacky, good word. Gregory, how about you? He must be AFK. There's no right or wrong answer here, and all of you gave excellent reasons why. Yes, this is 100% hacky, right? Especially when we consider our original rule for why we wanted to put JavaScript in JavaScript files and HTML in HTML files is to keep them separate. So this is obviously breaking that rule. There are a whole bunch of templating languages and libraries that will let you kind of mix and match the two. You might make some kind of thing that says something like HTML template equals something like OL ID equals key. Right? There are entire languages and frameworks in JavaScript that let you mix and match your templates together like this. There's no right or wrong answer here, with the possible exception of one of these might perform better, and the only way we could ever know that is we'd have to time both of them. So let me try that. We got 2 loops here. Let's time them both and let's evaluate together, because one may very well be better than the other. So let's. How do I undo this? Oh, cool, nice. So let's do this. So we'll do console.time, and what do we want to call this timer? Create element version, and then we'll come down here and say console.timeEnd create element version, and then we'll do another one, console.time inner HTML version, console.timeIn inner HTML. So this is purely for us to figure out, does one do better than the other? And I would be willing to bet that even if there is a result here, which there may or may not be, it will be very apparent when this is a large number, right? So if we had 20,000 things in here, then if there was a difference between these two methods, it will be very apparent. So let's just test it and see what happens first. Let's first take out all these console.logs, and the reason is we want to isolate the things that we actually care about testing. We want to see, is inner HTML faster than creating elements? I don't know the answer to that. But console.log, if the browser is slow for some reason, or if we're pumping a bunch of information in here, that could affect our time. So let's just take that out for now, right? So all we're looking at between these 2 timers is, the first one is creating the elements using JavaScript, setting it, appending child, and we're going to see which one's faster. And then inner HTML is doing the same thing, but just with strings. So let's test. We're still console.logging here. Let's take that out too. Okay. So create element took 0.4 seconds. Inner HTML took 0.7 seconds. Let's run it again just to make sure we're good. Okay, now it's switching around. 6.6, 0.5, 0.4. Okay, so we're not getting really clear results, right? So the thing that I maybe want to try is let's make a bunch. Let's see if we can, right? Let's turn this into a giant thing if we can. And this is kind of a hacky way to test, but hopefully it'll give us some conclusions, maybe. when this is super duper big. And when we feel like we've gotten enough, yeah, that's probably enough. Let's store our times. Okay, we good? Great, let's look at local storage. That's a lot of stuff. Okay. Alright, let's reload. Oh man, now there's a big difference. And that big difference is persisting. Right, so create element is going almost, what is that, like 300% faster? Almost. 1 second versus 3. 1 second versus 4. Let's, just to make sure that we're being completely unbiased, let's switch the order. Maybe the fact that the first loop is running first is doing something. So let's move inner HTML up. That would be an interesting thing to test. We'll just give us a little bit of space. So now inner HTML runs first. Yeah, seems like it's holding pretty steady. That create element is quite a bit faster. So that's interesting, right? So stylistically, a lot of us said that we like this. It flows better. Performance-wise, it seems like this one is the clear winner. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use this one, right? This is all happening in 2 milliseconds, right? The literal blink of an eye. If you're not tracking, 20 million results in here, like you're not actually running a timer for the Olympics, this difference is almost negligible. But it's important to know, I think the thing that is interesting out of all of this is that we've kind of learned how to profile 2 different versions of a thing to see if there is an actual benefit. And that will make a difference on the back end when we start storing things in databases and looping through elements. And that's interesting. I did not know that this create element method was significantly faster. Okay, remember when we changed this to only append child once? Maybe let's try the other way and see if that was slower, right? Maybe. So what did we do before? So instead of doing this, let's move this up. Right, remember how we had the first time? Let's actually copy the whole thing because I want to see all 3 of them in comparison, right? Because we did make a performance change already. So let's say create element inefficiently, right? Create element inefficiently. And so what we had before was this. Remember, was up here. And let's just make sure that maybe this was a better way. I don't know. We just assumed. And then document create element. So instead of appending it to the child of ordered list, we say document dot get element by ID. What is it called? Key. Right. Dot append child. So this is exactly how it was before. Okay. Interesting. Wow. Okay. So there's a lot of variability in here, but it seems like the create element, the one that we kind of fine-tuned, is doing better than all of them. Inner HTML and the create element inefficiently are... Oh, you know what? Are we... So one thing that we've missed in all of this, right? We're adding this to lap time splits, right? But we didn't clear out lap time splits. So as we are doing all 3 of these tests, lap time splits is going to be different each time. So we need to clear this first, right? So before our little test loop, let's say equals empty. So we're going to empty this out just to perfectly make sure that we're not introducing any problems in our little tests. Okay. Interesting. All right. Okay, yeah. Now we can very clearly see that the first version we had, the inefficient one, is running, almost twice as slowly as create element, the good version, and that inner HTML is still the slowest. Pretty frequently, right? So we've learned, at the very least, that our good one, the one we tweaked a bit, this is going to be the fastest. And if this had 1 million records in here, you should do this. if there's going to be 10, 15 records, something more realistic, you can use any method you want. And if you like the style of this one, by all means do it. There's nothing wrong with this other than like maybe you should not put HTML in your JavaScript like this, but it's a stylistic choice, right? Let me I'm gonna check this in with all three of these loops in here, because I think that we've done a lot of really interesting things in our little timer thing. We've got a bunch of different events in here, and I think it would be really useful for you guys to be able to just review all these different versions and all of the code that we've written together in GitHub. So let's just quickly okay, cool. So this is something that I did not know Visual Studio Code did, but this is really neat. Because we know that this is GitHub, it gives us this thing in source control. There's a publish to GitHub button. If you click on this, it's going to tell you, what do you want to call this? And so I'm just going to call it JS Events, because that was the name of the thing. And we're going to make this a public repository. And we'll select our two files. And it's doing all that stuff that we're doing when we go to GitHub, create a repository, pull it down, all that stuff. It's doing it for us. So if we go to GitHub now, where am I at? Let's just click on here. Yep, repositories. So we should see, yeah, JS Events. And so now you can come in here and read the code. I will send you guys a link to this so that you can refer back to it. I think this is a really interesting project that we've built together. Where's my channel? Here we go. Anyone have any questions or anything they want to look at in more detail? It is like 8:20. We've learned how to store things in our session, which is kind of like the first step to a database. Now, just like with everything else we talked about in client-side JavaScript, session storage and local storage are on the user's computer. You cannot trust this for anything that you care about. This is not a replacement for a real database. This is a place to stuff information that you maybe just want to have for, maybe great for prototyping, great for testing stuff out, not a server. The users can change these. Go ahead, Andrew.
So as far as real life, like actual application, like when would you use local storage for what purpose? Since it's like you said.
Yeah, local storage was really built to provide browsers with the functionality to do a couple different things. We used to stuff everything that we wanted to store on a user's computer in a cookie, because the cookie was like the only mechanism we used to have to store information. That was not the purpose. Cookies were not for that originally. It was really just for like, I am user ID 5, so that the server could track who you were. So they gave us this mechanism just to like give us a place to store stuff on the client without abusing cookies for ways they weren't intended. The second thing that this is really useful for is it enables us to build things to support offline mode, right? So even if we built this beautiful product where we're storing these lap timers and stuff, like if this store time button, for example, oh, I just cleared out all my beautiful things. Like in the real world, you'd actually be sending this data to the server, but that might fail. The server might be down. So local storage gives us a beautiful way to store like everything in this object and to check periodically to be like, is the server back up yet? Is the server back up yet? And then send it. Google Docs, Gmail, all those programs, if they're using some kind of offline modes that you can still use you can still read your email even if your internet's out in Gmail, and they're doing that because they've loaded all those emails into an array, shoved it into a JSON object, put it in local storage, and then when you click on email 5, if you're not online, it says, do I have email 5 in local storage? If the answer is yes, it can display it to you. So that's another real world example. Other things that you're going to use with local storage, I'm sure you guys have seen a whole bunch of websites that pop up a little thing that says, this website uses cookies. Please click OK to confirm that you're fine with this. They will say, if you click OK, they're going to probably store something in your local storage that says, like, this user has said yes to the cookie warning. So anything that you like don't necessarily care about, but that you want to only ask once. Like, we could do a real silly example here. So on page load, right? Let's say ask the user for his name and greet them, right? We can use, I always default to his because I'm his. Ask the user for their name and greet them in our h1. So I can do, just using the prompt mechanisms, I could say if local storage dot get item username, right, I'll just say that. So if there is a username in there, great, we're going to do something with it. Otherwise, we can do var username equals prompt. I can say, what is your name, friend? Right? And when they do it, I'll say local storage dot set item username. Right? And then what we want to do is say, oh, let's do this. This will be cleaner, right? We're going to use the same variable both places. Right? Var username. And I will say I'll say username equals local storage dot get item username. Okay. And then what we'll do is, if it's there, we're going to use it. If it's not there, I'm going to prompt for it, set it, and then use it. Username. And then I can come in here and go, what is the name of our element here? Do we have one? H1, and we haven't given it a name yet. So instead of saying fun, we want to say ID greeting. And so we can just make extra sure. We can say if username. So if there's a value in there, document dot get element by ID greeting dot inner HTML equals hello again plus username. Okay. So what is your name, friend? It prompts me. Eric. Hello again, Eric. And now literally every time I come to this page, right? Let's close it all out, right? And if I go to 127.0.0, yeah, it's always going to greet me. Right? It's a place for us to store stuff that is probably not mission critical, but makes our product feel more welcoming. If we wanted to care about cookies, we can store that in here. Show the cookie warning. If we want an offline mode, we store all the data, wait for the server to be back up, and then send it. Like if you're on an airplane, you might want to be able to hear we're doing work. And Estrella's app idea is a perfect example of this. She's got this little story editor, and she wants to be able to like write it. Right? If I hop on an airplane, I should be able to use your program, write a beautiful story. You can shove it into a local storage, and as soon as you land and the server recognizes that it has a connection again, it saves it, and everybody's happy. You've never lost any data. We could probably even use local storage to save an array of things that we've done, right? So if we were building a text editor in Estrella's case, you know how you're using Microsoft Word or any other text editor, right? You got Control Z is like an undo, or Command Z if you're on a Mac, right? Every time we make a change, because we can track document like a value change event, we're going to create a new local storage item that is like the most previous thing. And so now we've got this array of all the changes that have been made, and now we could implement an undo button that would walk through those each individual time. And it's perfectly safe. If you close your browser, right, I open back up, and I've got all of my changes ready to go. I probably don't want to store all of those changes on a server somewhere. That'd be a waste of our server database space. But on the browser, I got 5 megabytes to play with, right? I can, if I'm building a text editor and I write a paragraph today and a paragraph tomorrow, and then I copy and paste a paragraph above, I'm reordering my story, I might want to track all those changes. I might want to be able to just Control Z my way through them. Every time I load that page, I should be able to do that. That'd be a cool idea. Estrella, your story editor app better have local storage undo functionality. I'm going to expect it now. We could also build just for ourselves, like we were talking about, like little fun projects to keep us engaged and keep us happy over a long career. Like maybe I want to build a to-do app that just lets me track my own, like this is my to-do list. I don't need to pull a database into this. I can just use local storage and have it just for myself. So I can add a item, and when I'm done with it, take it off. You don't need to spin up a full server environment for something you're just building for yourself. That's another great use of it. What other questions? Anything? Water would be better if it had like bubbles and also caffeine. Have you guys noticed that?
I like my water plain.
Like vanilla water? Ugh. I could call this like bland soda.
Flat soda.
Yeah. No, because flat soda would at least have caffeine.
Well,
And maybe some color. It needs some color in here. It needs to be more lively.
0 calories, 0 sugar,
Diet.
0 some other stuff.
Diet boring water. All right, cool.
I guess it's better than dehydrated water.
What else would we like to look at? So we talked about cookies. We didn't really talk about how they're used. To me, the most interesting part of cookies is that cookies are automatically sent on each request from your browser to the server and then back again. So when we go to 127.0.0.1 or we go to google.com, there is a little tiny block of text that we can look at in the request that is going to be like the cookie attached to that domain name. And all it is a string. So we could do the same thing we're doing here, putting some JSON in it if we wanted to, and we can send data with every request to and from the server. That's generally how when you log into something, the server has sent back like an authentication token that will be stored in a cookie so that every time you go to that page in the future, that information will be available to the server just to verify that you are who you say you are. So before local storage existed, before session storage existed, us crazy JavaScript developers would shove a bunch of nonsense in a cookie so that we could access it on every request, because cookie was our only way to touch the file system and to store things that persisted over a session. But really, I think for our uses going forward, we'll really probably dive into cookies if we start building some backend stuff to do some authentication, so we can make sure that like when you send your username and password, the server checks to make sure the password is correct, and if you are who you say you are, we'll send back a cookie so you don't have to do that every time. But maybe we'll just look at it from JavaScript so we can see kind of what it looks like. So document.cookie is a blank string. Okay. So if I put something in here, document.cookie equals Eric, right? Now there is a cookie that says the word Eric. You can only have one cookie at a time. So that may be where that 5 megabyte restriction for local storage came from. Like, I don't know how long a cookie can be. Let's check that. Maximum length of a cookie. Okay, 4,000 bytes is even less. Right, so you don't have, we were talking about local storage giving us 5 megabytes. We could put, entire stories in local storage. But with a cookie, we can only have 4,000 bytes, and then we cannot have more than 50 cookies per domain. 4,093 bytes. Yeah, so, Gregory, do you have a question?
Are there other ways you store data into a browser besides cookie and local storage and I forgot the other one.
Not really. And I say not really in the sense that like nothing that's default or native to your browser. There are lots and lots of extensions you can put in here. Like there's a database called SQLite, that you can use and install on your computer to store in like an actual database, but it's not a real database. So you can.
It's like a cloud server?
What's that?
It's like a cloud server?
No, it runs locally. So you would install SQLite on your computer, and then your JavaScript can connect to that database and store things. But you'd have to have a plugin installed for that. None of that comes natively.
Okay.
Your two options are local storage and session storage. and a cookie. And a cookie we saw is limited in size to 4,000 bytes. So I would not recommend ever using that for storing anything. If we go in here to where was it at? Browsing data, settings, cookies, right? Cookies. Where do we see this? See all cookies inside data. So if we go to, so we can see here. Oh, here we go. We found where the session storage stuff is kept. So when you're in your settings and you go to all cookies and site data, this is stored by website, by domain. So the only domain that is able to access this information is the domain that set it in the first place. So on this one, we're at 127.0.1. This is my cookie for logging into the Clubhouse email, right? And so we can see we've got a database. That's our database storage for session and for local storage. And this is our cookie that we set. It's empty here because we didn't give it a name. But you can see it has the content of Eric, and then it tells you some information about, which is it's on this path, and it has, this is stuff that's specific to cookies, because you can have a website that sends a cookie for like /WordPress, so that you can log into WordPress. The domain knows that WordPress is there, but the cookie will only be sent when you're on /WordPress. So there is some path and some structure stuff that's available. And then it tells you when it expires. So as soon as I close this page, this cookie will disappear. And then I guess this is our local host. So let's see how this value changes when we put a bunch of stuff in here. Right? Did we break our code here? The pen child of null. How did we break our code? Oh, I must have typoed something. What line is that on? 205. Lap time LI. That's right. I don't know what broke. Let's see if we can figure this out. Start timer. Cannot read a pen child of null. Line 205 it says is broken. So if there's a timer, create that. So let's see what's in lap splits. Lap splits. File 1 array. Lap splits. Okay. Start a timer. Start next lap. Okay, so as soon as I do that, it fails. So let's see what's wrong here. Oh, I know what the problem is. It's because when we were testing our things up here, right, we emptied out our lap time splits div, and our lap time splits div, when we have it in our HTML, has our initial ordered list that has the information we want. So we probably, so that we don't break our code, let's make this empty. It doesn't empty the first time. So if there's, we don't have anything. So let's take this out. We got to take it out for all of them. Now that we know what we're doing. Okay, great. So now our LI is there and it's working again. Does everyone understand what broke? Because we emptied that div to test to make sure it was efficient, it emptied the div that we the initial ordered list that we were putting all of our results in for the actual timer. So as soon as that was gone, this timer was no longer able to store that stuff. Right? So let's reload the page. Yeah, and see we're just duplicating all those results. So let's. So we learned, for example, that the inner HTML was, this version was worst performing. Right? We'll say that this create element version was best performing. And we'll say that this is second best performing. All right, and then what we'll do is we'll just comment these all out so that they're there in our source code for us to look at in GitHub. You want to play with them, but we can. So this one was good. This one was worst performing. So now we've got it. We've figured out the best way to write our code here. Let's just move this up. to here. Perfect. So now we have one really good version of this. Create element efficient. Did I miss? Oh, no. I missed a. Perfect. So now we have a really good, well-written timer that runs in 0.49 seconds, and it seems like this was the amount of time it ran in when we had 40, 50 elements in here, right? So that's pretty good. It seems like that's running in a constant time. Interesting. Cool. Yeah. Oh man, that's even faster. Neat. So we've built something pretty cool here today. We've used session storage and local storage to save it. How did we save this information? What's the name of this communication format that we're going to use a lot of? Estrella. What do we call this string? Oh, Andrew maybe knows the answer.
So we're gonna convert it to JSON.
JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. Yeah, exactly right. And we've also learned today that we can create things that happen in the future, and we can create things that happen in the future over and over again with what two functions?
Session storage and local storage.
Nope, that was the storage mechanism. What were the two functions we learned that cause things to happen in the future?
Set timeout
Yeah.
and set interval.
Perfect. And what is the difference between the two?
Set timeout only works once.
Yep.
And set interval continues until you stop it.
Perfect. And if I wanted to get rid of an interval, how would I do that?
Clear interval.
Mm-hmm. And what do I need to clear the interval?
The time ID.
And where do you get the time ID?
From the set interval, it's the thing that it pushes back.
Yeah, that's the
Usually
returned
cancel.
value. And it's just a number, right? So, we could guess in some cases, and we could count from 1 to 1,000,000, and we'd eventually clear out that interval. But the easiest way is just put it in a variable, and we're done, and we'll get rid of it the next time. Awesome. You guys are amazing. Did everything we did tonight make sense? Is there anything we want to go over again? Andrew.
So, just a general question. How much more in depth is JSON? Because I know we just did 2 little functions of it.
What you see is what you get. JSON is nothing more than a way to pass around strings that we can convert into native objects. So, however complicated your object is, right? We could have. Let's make one real quick. Var obj, right, equals name Eric. Let's say R. Right, we can have arrays in here. Maybe like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can have other objects in it, so we can say like obj. So it'll be obj, and then we'll put in like cool kid. It could have numbers. 5. It's anything that can be an object in JavaScript can be converted into a JSON string. So we can do JSON.stringify obj. That's that. Now, there's one caveat, right? So we know that functions are objects. If you type a function in here, so let's call it something clicky, right? Click, do function. Maybe this is supposed to be an event, right? We'll do like console.log hello, right? So this is valid JavaScript, right? We can do obj.click, and we pass it a thing like, right? If we inspect this object, we can see that we have a function in here. But let's see what happens if we stringify it. JSON.stringify object. It stripped out that function. This is really just intended to pass data. It's not intended to like let us pass around functions and stuff. And so it definitely won't work in JavaScript. And if you pass this to PHP or Ruby on Rails or C#, they're not going to know what to do with it either. Right? You cannot pass executable code in this way. There's other ways to do it, and maybe we'll play with that if we ever want to feel wild. But JSON is just for passing values back and forth. So there's nothing much really else to do with this. Anything that we could store information in, like in our timers up here, right? That was just an object. It's perfect for that. What did you have something in mind when you were asking about that? No.
No, I just saw that we learned 2 arguments for the stringify and the parse, and I just didn't know if there was more to it.
Those are the only things I've ever used, but let's look that up. W3 schools. I mean, maybe there's a couple extra methods.
It does seem too simple. Like I'd heard of JSON before, like a lot of like web development stuff, but like only 2 things.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be more complex than that. That's all.
Yeah, no, it's extremely easy on purpose, and bear in mind that like what makes this powerful, and why this has become so ubiquitous, is that every programming language, whether it's JavaScript, PHP, C#, C++, Ruby on Rails, all they have to do to be able to use this method to communicate with each other is be able to turn a string that looks like this into a native data object. So it's very simple on purpose so that everyone uses it, right? We used to use PHP, for example, used to have their own encoding type, and God, what was it called? It's been like 15 years since I've used it because everybody uses JSON now. So it was like PHP encoded string. PHP encoded string. I don't know. They used to have their own version, and it was wild. Where it would store like it would do like the name of the variable, and then a colon, and it would do something else. So that PHP would know this is supposed to be an integer and it's got this value in it. But no other programming language would use it because that was PHP's version. JSON kind of came through, and the object notation was so beautiful that everybody decided this is the one we wanted to do. And so if you were writing a brand new programming language, this might be one of the first things you're going to need to write is like, how do I encode and decode JSON as a notation? There's not much to it. It's intentionally simple so that everyone will use it. Which is, back when I first started doing web development, there's a term called AJAX, which means asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The and XML part was how we used to communicate with servers, which was, I'm going to write a document, and XML, for example, looks kind of like HTML, so it would be like XML, and then we would have a node that was like user, and then the name would be like Eric/user/XML. Like we used to pass this kind of data around all the time. That's why we have AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. But the problem with passing this around is that parsing this in JavaScript is just as hard as working with the document object model, where we got to go like append child and look at children and look through nodes. You have to actually traverse all these trees. When it was far easier, and everyone pretty much just did this, which was we would either just pass HTML back and forth and then insert it directly with inner HTML, or we would just pass strings back and forth and then insert the string. So instead of, if I wanted to get a username, I might write a JavaScript function that would call the server, and the server would return back like Eric, right? And I would just do whatever, greeting inner HTML equals Eric. JSON made all of this way easier. And so even though we still call the technique AJAX, nobody passes XML anymore. Like, unless you're working with a bank from the 1990s, they might still have some AJAX. But we'll still call it AJAX, even though so even when Microsoft invented AJAX, because they were the first one, their object was, it's called XML HTTP request, right? Because it assumes that you're going to be communicating with XML. In like 1997, this is what we did, and it was terrible. But now we use XML HTTP request to send JSON back and forth, and everybody's happy. And we'll learn about that for sure when we get into the server stuff. What else? XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. So HTML is a subset of XML in the sense that XML is like a tag-based document format, but XML is like a superset of that, and a superset means that like XML describes that it is a language that allows you to have a tag-based language. So you need a schema that defines all those tags. It has to be valid syntax, so deciding if things are nested correctly. There was a period of time in which HTML was going towards being more XML-like, in which, like, if you wrote the incorrect tag, your website would not even render. Everyone decided that was nuts, and so for the most part, HTML5 and to a lesser extent HTML4, way back when these things were being decided in the early 2000s, everyone was like, we like that these are tags, but we don't want to be as crazy strict as XML is. So we used to use a version of HTML called XHTML, which was even crazier. So let's see if we can XHTML templates, right? Yeah. So we had to like include a doc type up here. We would have to put in what so here's an example of a document type definition. Let's see if this even still loads. We'll let it run in the background. But everything had to be perfect. And that's where we get a lot of these, like, some of these attributes were required in XHTML. Yeah, so this is a document type definition for XML that defines HTML, right? So it's telling you, like, this entity could exist, and it can be used in all these different places. This defines HTML. This defines XHTML, which was like an older version, right? So it starts with element HTML, and it has, it will have a head and a body in it, right? This is how this is defined. These are the attributes that the HTML tag can have. This is the head element, right? It can, it can have a title, right? This is crazy language. We were weird way back in the day. I'm happy we don't do this anymore. This was nuts. Cool. What other questions do you guys have? Leah.
So it's kind of unrelated, but like for backend stuff, how are we gonna be editing that? Like, is it gonna be in VS Code, or is there another program for it?
We're gonna use VS Code as often as possible in this class. VS Code is our development environment. It's our text editor that lets us write code. Now, for actually when you are working on backend code, we're going to run this on our local computers, just like we are with kind of our little fake live server here. But the cool thing is going to be, as soon as we start learning backend code, we're going to write our own little servers, and we won't have to use this live server anymore. Then the cool thing about when you are working on backend code is that you might develop it on your local computer and then shove that code up to a server that knows how to run it, and then, it'll be like a regular website. Anyone in the world can go to that address. If we buy a domain, domains are like $8. You could buy a domain name and say the domain name points to this server, and then that server will be running your backend code, which will be JavaScript, and maybe you have a database on there as well. And so then whatever code you write on your backend, if I make a GET request to index.html, the server is going to send that file back. If I send a post request to index.html, maybe the server is going to grab all those variables that we passed along in a form or in JSON. It's going to take them and it's going to do something with it. So to me, backend is like where the magic really happens, right? You can make a tool that can be used by 1 million people with no more complicated of code than what we've been doing on the front end. It's all still JavaScript. And as you heard from Mike earlier today, it doesn't really matter what programming language you're using. You're going to go to some place and they're going to run PHP or Python. The languages are similar enough that, like, you might have to look up, how do I loop through an array in Python? And it'll read the instruction. Here, let's do that as an example. Looping through Python array. Right? Click on the top list. And so you can see that even though the code syntax looks different than we're familiar with, let's make this a little bigger, right? It's still kind of similar, right? It says list equals, and then a thing. You notice that Python doesn't have a semicolon at the end. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. And then for I in list, so that's kind of like our JavaScript object looping. And then it says print I, which in this case says 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So that's super interesting. So this is almost like the for var I of, right, that we've been using in JavaScript. So the only thing that's different is you just got to train your head to be like, oh, I'm in Python now. I'm going to loop this way. And if you get it wrong, I'm sure that let's see what happens. Let's say we put up. Oh, am I allowed to edit this? Yeah, cool. For var. Let's just say you forget you're working in Python, and we run this. Let's see if this got some. I don't know. It would tell you like, hey, this doesn't work. Unrecognized keyword of or something, and then you'd be like, oh yeah, Python is silly. I'm not signing up for your little thing. Yeah, here's another one, right? So how do you get the array length in JavaScript? It's array.length. Well, Python gives us a function called len. It's pretty similar. No, do not spend any time during this code school learning Python at all. Let's focus on getting really good at one language first, so that it becomes natural to you. So that when I say, create a list of objects and loop through it, shove it into local storage with JSON, you guys should be like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. Then when you get into your first, second, third jobs, if you're working on side projects, pull out Python, pull out Ruby, pull out PHP, learn new things, build a video game in C#. That expose yourself to a lot of different kinds of programming, and then you'll be moving up the ladder from a junior engineer to an engineer to a senior engineer, and then eventually, in 20 years, you'll be, running the next Amazon replacement called Sahara, where it sells everything A to Z, but it's made out of sand or something. I don't know. Cool. Yes, leave site. Any questions? Anything we want to go over or discuss? It's 8:52. I think it's been a pretty good week. We've covered a lot of interesting things, especially events, and to me, the interval stuff is really powerful. And then local storage is amazing. We can shove any kind of data we want in there, and I can build an entire app using local storage before I even worry about doing stuff on the back end. Just building out the interaction. Does this product flow right? Does it do what I want it to do? Does it look good? I can worry about back end stuff later. I'm out of non-carbonated soda. All right, I'm going to stop the recording here. We've been going pretty long today.